Life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate. He attacked 35-year-old Zara in East London as she walked home after a night out last June. The findings show McSweeney should have been treated as a high-risk harm offender, but was wrongly graded as medium risk. Farah Naz says more needs to be done to avoid the same thing happening again.
Our streets are not safe. Probation work has to be tight, has to be high quality, because the risks, the stake is high. The stake is lives. Zara's life was taken, and probation have blood on their hands.
Policing Minister Chris Philp says the government has ordered a review into how McSweeney's probation was managed.
The probation service, I think, has completely accepted the recommendations the inspector has made. They're making changes to the way they risk assess offenders. They're putting more resources into it. They've hired, I think, an extra couple of thousand, 2,500 probation service staff in the last 2 years. They're increasing their funding by £155 million to make sure this doesn't happen again. They're supervising, I think, over 200,000 offenders. This kind of incident is thankfully very rare, but it is appalling and heartbreaking when it does happen.
The chairman of the BBC says he will not stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. Richard Sharp made the comments as he welcomed a review by the Commissioner of Public Appointments into how he got his job. Mr Sharp is under scrutiny over his links to the former Prime Minister and his role in talks over an £800,000 loan. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp says he's confident he was appointed on merit. A senior Conservative MP has suggested the Prime Minister did not know Nadhim Zahawi had any outstanding tax issues when he appointed him as chair of the party. Just a warning of flashing images coming up.
You're going to resign, Mrs Zahawi? Do you feel under pressure to resign, sir?
Rishi Sunak has ordered an ethics inquiry into Mr Zahawi's tax affairs after he admitted paying a settlement to HMRC following an error over shares in a polling company he co-founded. The former Chancellor has welcomed the investigation, saying he's confident he acted properly throughout. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling on the Tory party chair to resign.
The idea that you could have been Chancellor when you were negotiating this is simply offensive. This is not a miscalculation. You can't miscalculate to hold money offshore and then not pay it and then have to pay a penalty. I think whatever your political persuasion, in any government, this is an individual who would have resigned or would have been sacked. Yes, let us get into the detail of what in fact happened, but Nadhim Zahawi should no longer be on the front bench. That is absolutely clear.
Latest figures show government borrowing hit a new record high last month as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households. The Office for National Statistics says the government borrowed £27.4 billion in December, the highest monthly figure since 1993. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says the government is making tough decisions to get debt to fall. Almost 2,000 ambulance workers in the North West are walking out today in an ongoing dispute over pay. The government says it will continue to engage in talks with the NHS, but the GMB union says ministers are belittling their efforts to save lives rather than discussing a pay offer. North West paramedic Paul Turner says they don't want to strike, they want the government to save the NHS.
We are massively understaffed, and when we get called to jobs, we're struggling to get there. You know, we're hearing constantly on our radios that there is emergencies outstanding and no one to go to them because we're either queuing outside hospital or we just don't have the staff to respond. We've had 10 years now of austerity with no real term pay rises. We are constantly under inflation. And now I've got members right behind me and all over the UK that are returning to food banks and looking to other means to be able to pay.
Poland has formally requested Germany's approval to send up to 14 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. The Polish Defence Minister says the request comes as the security of the whole of Europe is at stake. A German government spokesperson says they will treat the request with urgency. It's after Boris Johnson urged other countries to follow the UK's lead in providing the tanks. Writing in the Daily Mail, the former Prime Minister called on other nations to provide Kiev with the weapons it needs to win the war. Princess Eugenie says she and her husband Jack Brooksbank are so excited to be expecting their second child. A photo released on Instagram by the princess shows the couple's first child, August, hugging his mother's tummy. In a statement, the palace says the royal family are delighted and August is very much looking forward to being a big brother. Congratulations to them. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's over to Patrick.
No surprise, the emails are already coming in thick and fast on this particular case. It's a case which raises serious questions as to whether the UK's immigration service is capable, frankly, of preventing dangerous, violent criminals from entering Britain. An Afghan asylum seeker has been found guilty of murdering an aspiring Marine in Bournemouth last year. Lawangin Abdulrahimzai posed as a child to enter the UK, despite having been convicted, get this, of a double murder in Serbia and being denied asylum in Norway. He was also convicted as well of drug dealing in Italy, reportedly. He was convicted for the fatal stabbing of 21-year-old Thomas Roberts in Bournemouth following an argument over an e-scooter. Now, the Tory MP Lee Anderson, who sits on the Home Affairs Committee, is calling for tougher action, as indeed a lot of you are as well. I want to get to the heart of this story. We're going to be returning to it every single hour that I'm on air and throughout the hour as well. Get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I want to know how many adults posing as children are in UK schools. I also want to know how on earth this guy was allowed in, and frankly, loads more questions as well, namely based as well around why can't we do more to age verify people coming across here. GB News' Home and Security Editor Mark White joins me now. Mark, the breaking news to start.
Yeah, I mean, this is an absolute shocker of a case, and it highlights something we've been reporting on for many months now, the real concerns about the vetting process for those coming across. How do you know when people throw away their documentation and lie about what the real names and dates of birth are, who they are, and the potential threat they pose? Couple that with the other scam that's going on, which is many people who are adults being told to say that they're teenagers because they are treated differently within the asylum system. We know that they've been both going on in tandem. So this case is really a stark illustration of that. And following this murder, now we have Lee Anderson, who is on the Home Affairs Select Committee, a senior backbencher, now saying it's time to actually detain all asylum seekers until we can do proper checks to establish who exactly they are and the potential threat that they pose. This is what he said, first of all.
I've been saying from day one, anybody arriving here illegally on our shores, because we can't do the full background checks, they should be detained until we can fully decide who they are, where they've come from, and if they've got a legitimate asylum claim. If not, keep them detained in detention centres. That's not too difficult to do.
OK, so first and foremost, ladies and gentlemen, everyone watching or listening, I want your views on that. Do you think, as Lee Anderson has suggested there, that there should be mandatory detention until, frankly, we can figure out who a lot of these people are? But the details of this case, Mark White, are absolutely staggering. The catalogue of unbelievable offences and the fact that this guy ended up in a school full of kids in this country. Yeah,
Abdulrahimzai came to the UK in 2019, crossed the Channel by ferry, claimed asylum at this end, said he was 14 years old, and then dragged out, along with his lawyers, according to authorities, for a number of years, the proper vetting checks to try to determine what age he was. They've now determined that he's now 21. He would have been 18, actually, when he crossed. And, of course, by claiming he was 14, he's given completely different treatment. He's put in the care of a foster family who, incidentally, have said that they were very concerned about his behaviour, the fact that he was constantly stealing knives from the foster mother to go out into the streets of Bournemouth and around Dorset carrying this knife, feeling that he was properly entitled to do that. Well, it's now, of course, emerged that when this young man came across, before he came across, about a year before, he was involved allegedly in the murder of two again, Afghans in Serbia in what was believed to be a dispute over people smuggling. He, we're told, had an AK-47, shot them at close range. He was convicted in his absence by the Serbian government, also convicted of drug offences in Norway and denied asylum in that country. You were seeing also some indications he was convicted of further drug offences in Italy. And for the Home Office here, there's a nightmare scenario of not really being able to get a handle on who he was and check all this, because there's no sort of joined up database with Serbia. But in reality, he was giving a completely different name to the name he had in Serbia anyway, and a completely different date of birth. This is the point,
isn't it? This really is the point when people go, oh, we don't know who some of these people are and exactly where they come from or exactly what their state of mind is or exactly what they're capable of. It's stuff like this that makes that justified to say.
There's no doubt, and authorities have told me that out of the 45 almost 46,000 who came last year, there is no doubt there are hundreds of people who have criminal records who are not really conducive to the public good in this particular country, who you would never want to allow into your nation and be a potential threat to the UK. But the difficulty is, if, as we've discussed, you can't really get a handle on who they are because they're giving false information and they're being schooled by the people traffickers. And then, of course, once they get into the hands of the sort of immigration lawyers, they are there. I'm not saying that the immigration lawyers are telling them to do anything illegal, but they're certainly coaching them on the best, most effective way to ensure that their asylum process and their asylum decision is favourable at the end of the day.
One of the things I'm going to come on to a bit later in the show is how on earth this particular individual, who was posing as a 14-year-old, was allowed to attend school, obviously with people who are genuinely 40 years old. A lot of reports coming out about some of the things that may or may not have happened whilst he was at that school as well. Sickening stuff. We'll come on to that. But the age checks are a big thing for me, Mark. Why can't we do mandatory age checks for people? Is it difficult?
There's a lot of opposition, and it's coming from human rights groups and lawyers who say that this is invasive, as far as children are concerned. It infringes on their human rights. But this morning, as well as Lee Anderson now saying that he wants people detained until we can ascertain exactly who they are and the threat that they pose. The Policing Minister, Chris Philp, speaking in LBC today, has said that this case with Abdul Rahimzai absolutely illustrates why we need to be more innovative and carry out what some may say are invasive checks, but really it's x-raying wrists and other procedures that are not painful, but yes, they are medical checks to try to determine whether the body of an individual is the body of a 14, 15, 16-year-old or the body of a 19, 20, 21-year-old. And that's what Chris Philp says we need to do. And he said that the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, is going to go ahead with proposals in the very near future to ensure that those checks are carried out to stop people who are coming over here claiming to be children and then just disappearing.
Well, and then just disappearing. And it's on that note as well. I understand the Home Office is investigating claims, Mark, just moving this story on slightly. It gets worse, ladies and gentlemen, if you are glued to this at home or listening on your car radios, whatever you're doing. There's claims that asylum-seeking children are being kidnapped from hotels. What's the detail on this?
Well, I have to say that the feedback I'm getting from sources is that they're pretty sceptical and dubious about this line that they're being kidnapped. Yes, people who are on the face of it being considered as child asylum seekers are disappearing from hotels around the country in the hundreds. But there is a suspicion from the authorities that actually many of these children are not children at all, and they fall into the category of Abdul Rahimzai, who say that they're actually children when they're adults, and they're not disappearing because they're being kidnapped, but they're being met in pre-arranged meetings with people who are facilitating their journey away from those hotels to do whatever they do, to meet up with friends or family, work in the illegal economy, go into criminality, whatever it might be. But I'd be very careful about buying into the line that people are coming in just kidnapping these children.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm being told. Is what the authorities suspect is happening.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are, as always, very, very lucky to have Mark White Services here at GBNews. And Mark, you will be in and out throughout the course of this show as these variety of, frankly, pretty bleak but blindingly obvious, unfortunately, in many cases, stories keep coming into us. Mark, thank you very much. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. Good grief, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute shocker, isn't it? That individual posing as a 14-year-old boy, double murderer in another country, convicted of drug dealing offences in another country, allowed to wander in, enter a UK school and then murder an individual on the streets of Britain. It is shocking stuff. It is, indeed. We're just moving away from that now for a moment, then, ladies and gentlemen, because probation officers have been accused of having, quote, blood on their hands after failings left a sexual predator free to stalk and kill a trainee solicitor just days after his release from prison. Jordan McSweeney sexually assaulted and killed 35-year-old Zara Aleena in East London in June 2022. The 29-year-old attacked Zara near her home in Ilford. He was jailed for 38 years last December and had 28 separate convictions dating back 17 years. Today, the head of the probation watchdog, Justin Russell, said that McSweeney should have been recalled to prison 6 days before the attack if probation staff had followed procedures correctly. Well, let's speak now to our London reporter. It's Lisa Hartle. Lisa, thank you very much. So, what did this report actually conclude, then?
So, the report by Chief Inspector of Probation, Justin Russell, found failings by probation officers left sexual predator Jordan McSweeney free to stalk and kill law graduate Zara Aleena just days after he was released from prison. 28 previous convictions, but it was still listed as a medium risk by a probation team. The report found that probation failings that prevented the sexual predator from being recalled to prison could happen again. The Chief Probation Inspector said there are over 500 serious further offences committed by people on probation each year. He said that the clear lesson from the case was that overworked staff don't have the time to go back over case files. He added staff are forgetting to do checks with local councils and police. And because their caseloads are so big, they have limited times to do an assessment. So they tend to just focus on the most immediate offence rather than looking back over someone's criminal past.
Yes, goodness me. And the family of Zara Aleena have actually spoken out this afternoon, I think, haven't they? What have they had to say?
So Zara Aleena's aunt, Farah Naz, said that she thinks it's pretty clear that women and girls aren't safe if the probation service isn't doing its job properly. In a statement, Prisons and Probation Minister Damien Hines apologised to Miss Aleena's family for the unacceptable failings in this case. However, Miss Naz has said the family need more than an apology. She said these recommendations have been made before and people have been promised that they're going to be followed up. This is Farah Naz now. We've got a clip of her speaking earlier.
There's a lot of errors here. This wasn't just a man who happened to kill Zara because he's a monster. This monster was made. This monster was facilitated. And this monster was given a license to walk free.
Lisa, thank you very much for bringing us that report. That's our London reporter, Lisa Hartle. Well, also joining me is former probation officer and professor of criminology at Staffordshire University. It's James Treadwell. James, thank you very much. Sorry to speak to you under such bleak circumstances, of course. I think the immediately obvious thing here is the fact that you were a former probation officer. Now, a lot of the headlines, maybe I'm guilty doing this from time to time, is sticking it to people like this, going, why didn't you do your job? But the reality is that they are massively overworked, aren't they? However, the stark facts of this case, and you look at this guy, criminal record as long as your arm, how on earth was he allowed to go out and kill?
I think that's a very, very good question. And Farah Naz has been brilliant in what she said. But I think the problem is to locate the failures purely at the hands of the probation officers and not follow them up the chain. That's part of the problem. And let's not forget that this is happening just days after Damien Bindle and his case, and then we can go back to Usman Khan, and I can go right the way back to Lisa Skidmore, and it's happening again and again and again. And when these sorts of failures do happen, what then happens is the people who are held responsible are the people at the front line. It's the individual probation officers. There's no accountability for the people up the chain who are managing them. There's no accountability into His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, as is now in the Ministry of Justice. And there's no accountability in government, where every time this happens, we're really sorry, changes will be made, it won't happen again, and the same thing plays out yet again. Because there are a lot of things going on in the background here with, for example, risk assessments not necessarily being fit for purpose. There's not enough time given over. There's not the cultivation of that professional curiosity that's needed for a law enforcement agency to be checking and verifying people's background and history.
I get that, Jason. I can't help but wonder, though, at what point we have to lock people up and throw away the key. All right, this guy now, jailed for 38 years, probably will never see the light of day again. He's already committed a very heinous crime. He's already killed someone. He had 28 separate convictions dating back 17 years. You are, of course, as well, a professor of criminology. Are there some people here who just need to be locked away forever before they go and kill?
Yeah, there are some very, very dangerous people out there. And if not locked away, then they need to be very, very carefully and professionally managed. And that includes, for example, not allowing them to roam the streets for hours and hours and hours when you know that they're a risk and they should be back in prison custody. And in many ways, it's not just the system of recalling individuals and beginning that process. It's then having the power to go out, take them off the streets quickly and effectively, and very often that doesn't happen, because who's responsible for doing that task? That requires police officers then, who are very often overstretched and overworked to go out and get people, whereas in all honesty, a lot of the time, they're not arresting people who've failed to turn up at courts on warrants or people who've breached licences unless they encounter them through everyday interactions. So there are huge failures across the whole of the justice system. And I think we also ought to think about this in light of the previous story that you had as well, whereby we're failing to verify people who are arriving in the country and necessarily check out who those are. So,
Exactly. Just on that, right, people, I hate to say it, but I think have a right to be fearful. They have a right to be scared. You look at this particular chap, double murder in a different country, drug dealer, obsession with knives, fighting men for money on the streets in Britain, allowed to wander into a school and stay there posing as a child, goes on to kill someone, goodness knows what else it may or may not have done as well. You've got this particular individual here, a string of convictions as long as your arm, allowed to go on and kill in a horrific way a girl. People like you and I, and everyone watching and listening to this now, relies on our security services at various different levels. I hate to say it, but are we being let down?
I think we are, yeah. I think we are lots and lots of the time. And I also think there is a wider problem at times, and I've written and talked about this with the kind of ideology that comes at times from on high, the sort of progressive liberalism at times that kind of says, look, things will be all right. These people just need to be kind of brought back into the good. And there isn't enough cynicism at times when people have done very, very bad things about their potential to change. The greatest indicator of a future risk is what someone's done previously.
I agree. Yeah, completely. And I'm sorry about this. We're going to have to cut it short because we're a little bit pressed for time, but I think people will have been hanging on every single word that you said there because it was very, very valid, the lot of it. And, frankly, as well, common sense, which appears to have been lacking, and certainly in the first two stories that I've covered here. That is, of course, former probation officer and professor of criminology at Staffordshire University, James Treble. We'll speak again soon, James. Thank you very, very much. Right, bit of a bleak start to the show, that, ladies and gentlemen, but two important stories nonetheless. And get your emails coming in on both of those. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I want to know whether or not you think we should have mandatory age tests for anyone who's claiming asylum in this country. Coming up, though, an update on the continued fallout over Nadhim Zahawi's multi-million-pound tax case. One senior Tory says the former Chancellor should stand aside whilst an investigation is conducted. I will be back in a tick.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind, and we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
and right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, people, welcome back. That story that we had a little bit earlier on about the asylum seeker posing as a child who went on to kill an individual over here, despite having already killed a couple of people abroad, been a convicted drug dealer, etc., has really lit the inbox up. Just a quick one. Lee Anderson has been saying that he thinks that people should be essentially locked up until we can verify exactly who they are and how old they are. John has been on. Lee Anderson is talking absolute sense. He thinks people should be detained until we can establish who they are. Later on in the show, I'm going to be returning to this issue because another facet of it is that this chap was allowed into a school with kids, and I wonder how many people the same goes for. How many schools at the minute have adults posing as children sitting in a maths class? But we're moving away from that for a second. Get those views coming in there. GB Views at gbnews.uk. We're moving on to another controversy, much less a controversy, it must be said, but the controversy over Conservative Party Chairman Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs continues as Number 10 has refused to give a deadline for the conclusion of the ethics inquiry ordered by the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak does want the investigation to be thorough and carried out swiftly. But speaking this morning, Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy said that Zahawi should resign or be sacked over the tax dispute. Labour frontbencher Lammy called the whole affair a massive distraction from the various crises the country is facing at the moment, and the government. Let's get more on this from our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, GB News' very own. Tom, what is the latest then?
Well, no big moves since this early afternoon when the government confirmed, of course, that this investigation, this independent investigation by the Prime Minister's ethics czar, really, who was only appointed towards the end of last year after a long search to replace the ethics czar that resigned under Boris Johnson. That took a long time, but Sir Laurie Magnus was the man who was picked, and already, not long into the job, he's got a fairly full plate. This is an investigation requested by Rishi Sunak into Nadhim Zahawi after new information, so says Number 10, came into the public domain over the weekend. It's a little bit embarrassing for Rishi Sunak because last week at Prime Minister's Questions he was asked about this and said that he had been assured that this was a settled matter, that he was happy with everything that had been said and that was the end of it. Well, it doesn't quite seem like the end of it now because, of course, more information came to light over the weekend. We now know that a sum and indeed a penalty was paid by Nadhim Zahawi while he was Chancellor between July and September last year. And there are lots of questions that need answering, so says now Rishi Sunak. And this investigation has thus begun. Now, the terms of the investigation are being set by Sir Laurie. The terms and indeed timing of the investigation is operationally independent from politics, from politicians, from Number 10. That, to some extent, is the way that things are done. That's the proper way to do things, making sure that it's independent, the terms of reference and all the rest of it. On the other hand, it does give Number 10 a very handy, some might say excuse, some might say can-kicking exercise, where they're able to say, not us, Gov, not me, that's all Sir Laurie's purview now, there's nothing more we can add.
Yes, indeed. Tom, thank you very, very much. There will be more that you can add a little bit later on in the show, though. Tom Harwood, there, GB News' very own political correspondent in Westminster for us. Right, stick with me, people, because coming up, Britain's borrowing has shot up to record levels. We'll have the detail and find out what it means for the wider economy with GB News' very own economics and business editor Liam Halligan. That's coming your way next. We're also going to be returning as well to a lot of your views, of course, and indeed experts onto exactly why we are such a soft touch and indeed are we in danger when people come over here. We don't know who they are or where they're from or what their intentions are. GB Views at gbnews.uk. But now, though, it's your headlines.
Thanks, Patrick. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 3:33. The aunt of murder victim Zara Aleena says probation officers have blood on their hands after a report found her killer was released from prison just days before carrying out the attack. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate. He attacked 35-year-old Zara in East London as she walked home after a night out last June. The findings show McSweeney should have been treated as a high risk of serious harm offender, but was wrongly graded as medium risk. Farah Naz says more needs to be done to avoid the same thing happening again.
Our streets are not safe. Probation work has to be tight, has to be high quality, because the risks, the stake is high. The stake is lives. Zara's life was taken, and probation have blood on their hands.
The BBC chairman says he will not stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. It's after Richard Sharp welcomed a review by the Commissioner of Public Appointments into how he got his job. Mr Sharp is under scrutiny over his links to the former Prime Minister and his role in talks over an £800,000 loan. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp says he's confident he was appointed on merit. Princess Eugenie and her husband Jack Brooksbank are expecting their second child. A photo released on Instagram by the princess shows the couple's first child, August, hugging his mother's tummy. In a statement, Buckingham Palace says the royal family are delighted and August is very much looking forward to being a big brother. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon.
Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now, lots of you, shock horror, have been getting in touch with your thoughts about an asylum seeker who was convicted of a double murder and drug dealing offences. He had an obsession with knives, posed as a 14-year-old boy and was allowed into classrooms with innocent children before murdering a man in Bournemouth. Jayendra says, everyone posing as a child should be age-checked. Why are we so gullible in the UK? We just seem to accept everything at face value too readily. Well, as we heard from Mark White, who'll be in a little bit later on, our home and security editor, apparently some people believe that it's against their human rights to do age verification checks. I mean, I would argue it's against the human rights of people in this country, basically, to be free anyway from the idea of this particular adult, fully grown man in their child's classroom, and that should be the way the human rights focus is. But Tony says when these people arrive, they should be photographed, fingerprinted and given a name, but to my knowledge, this isn't done properly. Tony, I do believe in this case as well, because this chap was using so many different names, it meant that it was basically impossible for us to trace the fact that he'd shot 2 people dead with an AK-47 in another part of the world and been done for drug offences and all of this stuff. Leslie says, just one more here, I don't see why our Home Office doesn't check international passport databases to match photos of the people claiming to be children if they've travelled through various countries to get here. Surely there will be some sort of trail. You would have thought so, but unfortunately there doesn't appear to be any. We're going to be returning to that story throughout the course of the show. Keep your emails coming in. We're also going to get a couple of you live on air to talk about it a bit later on when we hear from you wonderful people live on the show. But moving away from that for now, the UK government borrowed more last month than in any December since monthly records began over 30 years ago. That's according to new official figures from the Office for National Statistics. And it's being linked to inflation, with energy bill support for households and rising debt on interest costs driving soaring borrowing. Joining me now, who else, is our business and economics editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. Right, Liam, borrowing. What's going on?
The British government is borrowing a huge amount of money, Patrick, and these figures for December, I have to say, really are quite eye-popping. Here's some of the numbers in a graphic, just to help viewers get their heads around them. I'll do my best for the folks listening on the radio. In December 2022 alone, the British government borrowed £27.4 billion. A penny on income tax raises about £5 billion, right, throughout the year. So in a single month, the British government borrowed £27.4 billion, and that's more than double what it borrowed in December 2021, £10.7 billion. Massive increase. Why did borrowing go to the moon in December? Well, the reason is, we can see in the next graphic. It's because the government spent a lot of money on the energy support scheme, even though oil and gas prices are lower now than before the war in Ukraine started last February. Of course, energy bills are still twice as high. Funny that. Lots of profits or certainly surpluses for the energy companies. They would deny that.
Yeah.
So the British government is supporting our household utility bills to the tune of £7 billion in a single month, 700,000 million. And also, even more eye-popping, in a single month, the British government was on the hook for £17.3 billion of interest on the debt that it owes, right? Not just... That's not paying back the debt, that's interest on the debt that it owes. Why is the interest rate bill so massive in a single month? Because interest rates have gone up a lot over the last year, but also because of inflation. And increasingly, our debt, we index link it to inflation. We have to so people will buy it. The British government says, we'll pay you back not only with interest, we'll also adjust what you've lent us for inflation so you don't lose out from inflation. So these are huge numbers, and it's quite alarming. And so when people say, oh, the British government can afford to just pay public sector workers, they're just being horrible because they don't want to pay it. Well, £17.4 billion in 1 month on debt interest? Can we really afford to borrow more?
Well, yes, and where does this leave us going forward? Because we're still having to pay a lot back.
We are having to pay a lot back. This is what happens, in my view, when the state gets too big. Even though the tax burden... Tax as a share of our whole economy is at a 700 high. We're still borrowing a huge amount of money. And it strikes me, Patrick, this is the long tail, if you like, of the cost of lockdown. We spent so much money on lockdown, 400, 500 billion quid. Then there's lots and lots of borrowing in the system, which does limit the government's room for manoeuvre, not only to award pay rises in the public sector, which in some cases may be very well deserved, right? I'm not being churlish about it, but also the government to spend money or to give tax breaks to try and stimulate certain parts of the economy. Much, much harder when you're spending 17 billion quid in a month on your debt interest.
Yeah, absolutely unbelievable, and I think it does hammer a lot of it home to people.
I'm detecting a little flicker of interest, Patrick, in your eyes.
Interest? I think my interest rate has gone up, has it, Liam?
You see what I did there? You see what I did there? No, I mean, these are really incredible numbers.
It is.
And I'm trying to explain them in layman.
But there should be more of this. There should be more of this done, I think, in the terms that you've just done there, because it absolutely hammers it home to people. And I think
maybe we should do more economics and business on television. Why not? I wonder who suggested that.
Because I think, though, seriously, when it comes to this, though, it does hammer it home to a lot of people when they think there is a magic money tree in this country. And actually, our magic money tree is dead.
Absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
If there was a magic money tree, right, then, the Roman Empire wouldn't have collapsed. Zimbabwe would be in the G7, right? Yeah. There is not a magic money tree. It's not a point of view. It's just historic fact. But it's not all doom and gloom. I just want to quickly mention...
Go on.
I want to quickly mention a CBI survey, the Confederation of British Industry. They put out these surveys. They talk to lots and lots of business leaders across the economy. And just very briefly, Patrick, it seems that there are now signs, as we've been discussing, of easing of prices in the supply chain. The Producer Price Index number comes out tomorrow. It seems that firms' inputs, the stuff that they need to produce the goods and services they sell us, are now starting to get cheaper, or at least they're not getting as expensive as quickly. And this is a reason why, in my humble opinion, inflation, the headline figure, quite soon is going to start coming down sharply.
There you go. Nice to have a little bit of good news.
There you go.
Always leave them wanting more, Liam. Always leave them on a high. Absolutely so. Right, Liam Halligan there with On the Money, our economics and business editor. Right, let's get more on the main story that we were doing at the top of the show, as an asylum seeker who's been convicted of the murder of an aspiring Royal Marine entered the UK posing as a child. This is the story, of course, of Lawangeen Abdulrahimzai, fatally stabbed a 21-year-old called Thomas Roberts during a row, believe it or not, over an e-scooter in Bournemouth in March 2022. It's emerged that he had killed 2 people in Serbia. He was denied asylum in Norway. It's raised loads of questions over how effective our vetting procedures are for asylum seekers coming into this country. Later on, I'm going to be talking to somebody who's got kids, who's got kids at a school age and has got some pretty strong views about whether or not people, such as this individual, posing as a child, I should say, but is an adult, should be allowed in British schools around innocent children. But joining me now is Tony Smith, CBE, the former Director General of UK Border Force. Tony, thank you very much. I'm getting emails in the hundreds in front of me going, why can we not do mandatory age tests for everyone who comes over here?
Well, rightly so, Patrick. It's a very good question, and this case highlights a problem we've had for a great many years in the Border Force, even since I was there, about how do we know how old somebody is when we've got nothing to go on? They throw their passports away. We don't have any baggage or any other documents to check. We simply have to go by what they tell us. And this person clearly claimed to be age 14, and the test we currently apply at the Border Force is known as a Merton test, something that we acquired from social services, that if he's not patently older than that, and by that we mean obviously older than that, then he will be treated, in the first instance at least, under the unaccompanied minor provisions, which means he'll go into social care. The reason they do that, Patrick, of course, is because it's very, very difficult to be removed from this country if you're an unaccompanied minor as opposed to an adult. So, but I mean, it does highlight, I think, a number of concerns that we should have about age assessments at the border. The government are looking at more scientific opportunities. There's been a recent report published about scientific age assessments that I think we need to start to introduce, because it has been a serious problem for a very long time now.
We can do things like dental checks, we can do things like wrist x-rays, for example. The argument against it, and I, for the life of me, will never understand why people make this argument. I can only assume that they have some kind of weird, quite nefarious intention, frankly, because it's basic stuff, is that it's against their human rights. What about the human rights of the people here who don't want to send their kid to a school where there's a double murderer, an adult double murderer, sitting at the back of the classroom?
Exactly, Patrick. This is a real concern because we must try not to get it wrong either way. We can't have adults going into the child system. We can't have children going into the adult system either. In my experience, I say the current process, the Merton process, errs on the side of accepting a person's claim that they are a minor unless it is patently obvious that they are not. And that's quite difficult when we're talking about people in their teens up to about the age of 21. As you say, there are scientific techniques available. They're being used in some Scandinavian countries, I know, at the borders there. And I think the government are now looking at introducing such things at the border. But there are going to be people who are going to say, well, this is intrusive. You know, you're doing x-rays and dental examinations on asylum, so all kinds of arguments like that. But for my part, I think we do need to do something on this, Patrick. And clearly, we need to do it urgently because this is a terrible case, and my thoughts are very much with the victim's family.
Well, and as it currently stands, the problem is that there is nothing in place at the minute to stop this happening again. The age checks, frankly, are not taking place with anything like the regularity we would like them to be. There will still be fully grown men in schools at this very moment in time, right now, and nothing will be being done about it. Reports flagged up about an interest in knives, people flashing it all over social media, nothing being done about it, and this is a massive, massive problem for people. Tony, thank you very much. Tony Smith, CBE, the former Director General of UK Border Force. Surely, if any good can come out of this horrific case, it has to be that things do change. Do you have faith that they will do, though? Anyway, we're moving on now, ladies and gentlemen, because concerns are growing for a woman, her newborn baby and her partner almost 3 weeks since they went missing. Police now believe they have been sleeping in a tent in sub-minus conditions. Constance Martin and Mark Gordon are the subject of an international missing persons investigation after a string of attempts to slip under the radar of authorities. They were last seen buying camping gear at Argos in Whitechapel, East London, and that was on the 7th of January. Our national reporter, Ellie Costello, joins me now, and she has the story, I believe. In fact, she's got a package from Ellie first. Let's go to that.
Missing woman Constance Martin may have given birth in the back of a car, which was later found burnt out in the Greater Manchester area. Reports suggest that the placenta had been found by fire crews. The new mum is from an aristocratic family with links to the royals. She disappeared with her newborn baby and her partner, Mark Gordon, on January the 5th. The last official sighting of them was on January the 7th. So what do we know so far? Well, on the 5th of January, the couple left their abandoned car on the M61 near Bolton at around 6:30 p.m. The next day, the pair travelled 30 miles by taxi at 3:30 in the morning. On the 7th of January, they journeyed 267 miles south to the port of Harwich. They were then spotted in the Essex town of Colchester at 9 a.m. The last official sighting of the family was in the Whitechapel area of London. The police now say that Mark Gordon was seen on CCTV going into the Argos store in Whitechapel, where he bought a tent, 2 sleeping bags and 2 pillows. Each time that Miss Martin and Mr. Gordon are spotted on CCTV, they are covering their faces or looking away, and they have kept their baby covered up. Investigators say the couple appear to know how to evade authorities, making the search for them even harder. Concerns are also growing as neither Constance nor the baby have seen a doctor. The family have no luggage as most of their belongings were destroyed in the car fire, but Constance is believed to have access to cash. Her father, Napier Martin, made a direct appeal to his daughter through the Independent newspaper.
Darling Constance, even though we remain estranged at the moment, I stand by, as I have always done and as the family has always done, to do whatever is necessary for your safe return to us. I beseech you to find a way to turn yourself and your wee one into the police as soon as possible, so you and he or she can be protected. Only then can a process of healing and recovery begin, however long it may take, however difficult it may be.
Little is known of Mark Gordon. He was born in Birmingham but moved to the US with his family. When he was 15, he was convicted of rape and spent the next 20 years in jail. He was recorded as deported from the US in 2010. Constance and Mark Gordon appear to have gotten into a relationship in 2016 when she dropped out of drama school. She has been estranged from friends and family ever since. Photos on her Facebook shared in 2020 captioned "Her love sprogs" appears to suggest that she's had more than one child. In a statement, the Metropolitan Police said no child, especially a tiny newborn baby, should be forced to endure such dangerous, potentially life-threatening conditions. Please keep your eyes peeled, especially when you are out and about in wasteground or beauty spots, or while you're walking the dog, and report any information, no matter how insignificant you think it is, to us. Ellie Costello, GB News.
Yes, well, Ali does join me now. Ali Costello is here in the studio with me. I know you've been monitoring this case very, very closely. A lot of people will be wondering how on earth have they managed to stay hidden, and the concern, of course, for this newborn baby, really.
Yes, of course. I mean, this does seem like a family that do not want to be found, Patrick, and it must be said they've done a very good job of evading the authorities for the past 3 weeks. They haven't been seen since the 7th of January. It must be said, though, that Constance Martin is an aristocrat. She has access to cash. Perhaps someone like you or I wouldn't be able to go under the radar for this long, but she does, and the police certainly believe she has access to large amounts of cash, which is one of the reasons why she is able to go undetected. And this is the new information that's come out today, which is that the police believe they've now got the last official sighting of the family. It was buying camping gear in Whitechapel in East London on the 7th of January. They paid in cash, which is what they appear to be doing. And you will notice in these CCTV pictures, if you're listening on the radio, the couple do have their hoods up and they always have their faces covered. The baby is also always hidden away, sometimes in his mother's coat or his or her mother's coat, or otherwise in the pram. So they certainly do want to be left to their own devices. But of course, the police want to find them because there are concerns because Constance Martin, there's belief that she gave birth in the back of that burnt-out car that was found on the 5th of January. Reports that a placenta was found in the back of that car, and neither Constance nor the baby have been seen by a doctor, and that is why the police are just so desperate to get hold of this family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe we might have a picture of the tent, I think, that they purchased. There it is. So that, if you're watching on TV, you can see it. If you're listening on radio, well, essentially, it's a relatively small, I would say probably a 2 or 3 person light blue tent. And people are being urged to just keep an eye out for that, really, because these people will be camping out, won't they?
Well, that's certainly what the authorities are thinking now. It is a two-man tent from Argos, 2 sleeping bags and 2 pillows that were purchased, which would suggest that the family are camping out somewhere in the UK. The point being, though, they haven't been seen since the 7th of January, so they really could be anywhere by now. And that's what the Metropolitan Police have said in a new statement today. They said that they want anybody anywhere in the country to keep their eyes peeled when they're out on a dog walk or in a beauty spot, even in waste ground. Just look for this blue tent. It's quite a light blue tent, isn't it? Quite a small one. And let the police know, even if you think it's insignificant, it could be really helpful for this investigation.
Absolutely. Ellie, look, thank you very much for bringing us that report. Ellie Costello there, of course, our national reporter. Right, well, we're going to delve back into the inbox just to round off this hour. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts about that one that we're leading with throughout the course of the show. We'll be returning to it throughout. It's about the asylum seeker who posed as a child, went on to kill an individual. An aspiring Royal Marine, no less, in Bournemouth over an argument over a e-scooter, supposedly. A track record as long as your arm. A double murderer in a different country, convicted of drug offences, denied asylum in Norway, supposedly, allowed to come over here, posed as a 14-year-old, granted access to a school. Anyway, Wendy says, I worked with unaccompanied minors for a local council for 10 years. The majority I worked with were above 20 and usually in their 30s. We were required to integrate them into schools, which was a significant safeguarding issue, but everyone seemed to turn a blind eye. Our school had a special unit where the, quotes, children with beards were able to study away from the main classrooms. I mean, it's absolutely staggering, isn't it? And people talk about human rights, and they say, well, what about the human rights of these people? We can't dental check them, we can't do wrist x-rays, etc. What about the human rights of the 14-year-old girl who's in a classroom, who a fully grown man from a different country walks in one day and sits next to them in a maths class, and it turns out in this particular case, that man happened to be a double murderer with a string of drug convictions as well, who went on to commit another murder. So, shocking stuff. David says, I am no lawyer, but surely the British people have the right to sue this government for aiding and abetting illegal immigration and dereliction of duty by failing to protect our borders and the British people. Enough is enough. Look, of course, the British government would say that they are doing everything that they possibly can, overwhelmed by what's been going on in the Channel and indeed elsewhere. But yes, I think frustration is absolutely growing. And what is being done about this? This is the thing. There needs to be some good that comes out of such a terrible situation, which is that things need to change. Safeguards need to be put in place. Lee Anderson, for example, has come out and said, is it time that we detain people indefinitely until we know who they are and where they're from?
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. It's 4 o'clock. I'm Patrick Christys. You're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up, isn't it about time for tougher rules when it comes to verification and the monitoring of people coming into our country? A senior Conservative backbencher has told GB News he thinks all asylum seekers should be detained until full background checks have been carried out. Lee Anderson, who sits on the Home Affairs Committee, says he was horrified at the murder of an aspiring Royal Marine by an Afghan asylum seeker who was also wanted for 2 other murders in Serbia. Our Home and Security editor Mark White will bring us the latest on that. And before 4:30, the damning report, which highlights serious failings within the probation service, which led to a sexual predator free to stalk and kill law graduate Zara Aleena just days after he was released from jail. And David Lammy says that Labour will reconnect a tarnished UK with European allies. Get a load of that. Do you think that we still need a relationship with the European Union? Frankly, do you think that we're tarnished? Anyway, email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm asking whether or not you think that all asylum seekers should be detained until we know who they are and where they're from and how old they are. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But now, it's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The aunt of the murder victim, Zara Aleena, says probation officers have blood on their hands after a report found her killer was released from prison just days before carrying out her murder. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate. He attacked 35-year-old Zara in East London as she walked home after a night out last June. The findings show McSweeney should have been treated as a high risk of serious harm offender, but was wrongly graded as medium risk. Farinaz says more needs to be done to avoid the same thing happening again.
Our streets are not safe. Probation work has to be tight, has to be high quality, because the risks, the stake is high. The stake is lives. Zara's life was taken, and probation have blood on their hands.
Well, Policing Minister Chris Philp says the government has ordered a review into how McSweeney's probation was managed.
The probation service, I think, has completely accepted the recommendations the inspector has made. They're making changes to the way they risk assess offenders. They're putting more resources into it. They've hired, I think, an extra couple of thousand, 2,500 probation service staff in the last 2 years. They're increasing their funding by £155 million to make sure this doesn't happen again. They're supervising, I think, over 200,000 offenders. This kind of incident is thankfully very rare, but it is appalling and heartbreaking when it does happen.
Well, in other news today, the chairman of the BBC says he won't stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. Richard Sharp made the comments as he welcomed a review by the Commissioner of Public Appointments into how he got his job. Mr Sharp is currently under scrutiny over his links to the former Prime Minister and his role in talks over an £800,000 loan. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp says he's confident he was appointed on merit. And a senior Conservative MP has suggested the Prime Minister did not know Nadhim Zahawi had any outstanding tax issues when he appointed him as chair of the party. And a warning, there are flashing images coming up if you're watching us on television.
You're going to resign, Mr Zahawi? Do you feel under pressure to resign, sir?
Well, Rishi Sunak has ordered an ethics inquiry into Mr Zahawi's tax affairs after he admitted paying a settlement to HMRC following an error over shares in a polling company he co-founded. The former Chancellor has welcomed the investigation, saying he's confident he acted properly throughout. But Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling on the Tory party chair to resign immediately.
The idea that you could have been Chancellor when you were negotiating this is simply offensive. This is not a miscalculation. You can't miscalculate to hold money offshore and then not pay it and then have to pay a penalty. I think whatever your political persuasion, in any government, this is an individual who would have resigned or would have been sacked. Yes, let us get into the detail of what in fact happened, but Nadhim Zahawi should no longer be on the front bench. That is absolutely clear.
Almost 2,000 ambulance workers in the northwest have walked out on strike today in an ongoing dispute over pay. The government says it'll continue to engage in talks with the NHS. But the GMB union says ministers are belittling their efforts to save lives rather than discussing a pay offer. North West paramedic Paul Turner says they don't want to strike, but they want the government to save the NHS.
We are massively understaffed, and when we get called to jobs, we're struggling to get there. You know, we're hearing constantly on our radios that there is emergencies outstanding and no one to go to them because we're either queuing outside hospital or we just don't have the staff to respond. We've had 10 years now of austerity with no real term pay rises. We are constantly under inflation. And now I've got members right behind me and all over the UK that are returning to food banks and looking to other means to be able to pay.
Poland has formally requested Germany's approval to send up to 14 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. The Polish Defence Minister says the request comes as the security of the whole of Europe is at stake. A German government spokesman says they'll treat the request with urgency. That comes after Boris Johnson urged other countries to follow the UK's lead in providing the tanks. Writing in the Daily Mail today, the former Prime Minister called on other nations to provide Kyiv with the weapons it needs to win the war. And lastly, Princess Eugenie and her husband Jack Brooksbank are so excited to be expecting their second child. A photograph released on Instagram by the Princess shows the couple's first child, August, hugging his mother's pregnant tummy. In a statement, the palace says the royal family are delighted and August is very much looking forward to being a big brother. That's it from me. Now more from Patrick.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now, first, a case which raises serious questions as to whether the UK's immigration service, frankly, is capable of preventing dangerous, violent, murderous criminals from entering Britain. An Afghan asylum seeker has been found guilty of murdering an aspiring Royal Marine in Bournemouth last year. Lawangin Abdul Rahimzai posed as a child to enter the UK, despite having been convicted of a double murder in Serbia and denied asylum in Norway. He was convicted for the fatal stabbing of 21-year-old Thomas Roberts in Bournemouth following an argument over an e-scooter. He was also allowed into a school, obviously full of children. Now, the Tory MP Lee Anderson, who sits in the Home Affairs Committee, says all asylum seekers should be detained until full background checks have been carried out. Joining me now is GBNews' very own Home and Security Editor, it's Mark White. Mark, this Lee Anderson suggestion is getting a lot of traction about detaining all asylum seekers, well, frankly, until we know a bit more about them.
Yeah, I mean, there are practical difficulties in that. The government would have to then acquire centres, detention centres that these people could be put in. We know when they've tried to do that with the likes of the barracks up in Linton on Ouse in Yorkshire, there was a big public outcry. There have been outcries about university campus being used up in Hull. People don't want thousands of young men, mainly, housed in their areas as well. It would have to be a secure detention centre as well. So they would need the infrastructure there. Practically speaking, it might be difficult in the short term to achieve that, but you can absolutely see the sense in where Lee Anderson is going as far as many people are concerned, because we've been highlighting for a long time now the real concerns that authorities have that people coming across into the UK by small boat in the backs of lorries, however they do it, they're told by the people smugglers to throw their documentation away, their passports, other identifying documents, mobile phones. They turn up, then they give a story to the Border Force officials in the UK that they may be this age, they're called whatever name they're called, and this is their backstory. And it's really, really, to be fair to the authorities, really, really difficult for them properly to investigate who these people are. Now, this young man was convicted of a double murder, horrific double murder in Serbia, gunned down two other Afghans in a dispute apparently over people smuggling, shot them with an AK-47, was convicted in his absence, but he was convicted of that crime under another name and another date of birth. So even if the UK authorities had checked with the Serbians, they'd never have known that this young man was the same young man. So Lee Anderson saying, given all that, now we need to have a proper system where anyone arriving undocumented should be detained until we can establish who they are. This is what he said.
Saying from day one, anybody arriving here illegally on our shores, because we can't do the full background checks, they should be detained until we can fully decide who they are, where they've come from, and if they've got a legitimate asylum claim. If not, keep them detained in detention centres. That's not too difficult to do.
OK, so that's Lee Anderson, their prominent backbench Tory MP, saying that in response to this horrific incident, that we should be detaining people until we know a bit more about them. The fact is, Mark, we appear unable to stop people coming over here. If they ditch their documentation, we are therefore unable, with any kind of ease whatsoever, to know who they are or where they're from. It would also make it difficult to do background checks, etc. One thing that I think is fascinating a lot of people is the age verification checks. Now, this particular individual claimed that he was a 14-year-old boy. I mean, if he's 14, I'm Cristiano Ronaldo. The 5 o'clock shadow on that guy from the day that he rocked up here, I think, was absolutely astonishing. Why can't we do more age checks?
The truth is there's a whole industry really built up around those who want to come here and claim asylum status with a view to getting into the UK from the very outset, from the people smugglers, those arranging for their transport to France and then across the Channel, and then the immigration lawyers as well. Now, I'm not saying that the immigration lawyers in any way are coaching these people to break the law, but they are certainly giving them the best advice to ensure they get the best possible outcome with their asylum claims. And the people smugglers are absolutely not just breaking the law in taking them across the Channel illegally, but they are telling them what they should do, which is throw your passports, throw your documents, throw your phones away and tell this particular background story and say, if you're young enough to get away with it, say you are a child, because then it's a different process you enter into, and it's far more difficult getting rid of an unaccompanied child, of course, than it is an adult.
And in the meantime, they get given school places. This particular individual was given a place at a foster home. I mean, that foster mother is an incredibly lucky individual. This particular chap in question was pocketing knives, was seen stealing knives, clearly used.
You should say this is on the evening that he killed this young man in Bournemouth. It was an argument that broke out. This young man had intervened really to try and act as a peacemaker and got stabbed
So what people are looking at now, if you're watching on telly, is what, Mark?
This is his movements prior to that event. It was an argument over an e-scooter. This is him in a shop prior to the stabbing taking place. There's other video as well. CCTV shows him getting into another violent argument with a group in Bournemouth outside a pub a little earlier on, where you can see him actually headbutting a man in Bournemouth as well, and part of that. This is the incident here. You see, he comes into shop with the hood, just headbutts a man there. This was a violent man. He apparently got into street fighting to earn some money. Because he was a child, or said he was a child, in fact he was an adult, but because he was a child, he was taken on and into the foster care system. So he had a foster family. His foster mother has said that she was very concerned and worried because he kept stealing knives from her kitchen, which he would wander about with outside, because he believed he had the right to do that to protect himself, according to her. And of course, we know that he had a knife which he used in a murderous way on that evening in March of last year.
And supposedly was posting things on TikTok, on Snapchat. There's
the knife
pictures
there.
See, that is a knife there that the individual is holding. There are Snapchat. So there are other question marks as, well, there's a Snapchat.
This is him again. You can see how violent this young man was. So and he posts TikTok videos, as you say, showing his fighting and posing with knives and things like that. The alarm bell, should have been ringing.
Red flag, red flag, red flag, non-stop. And it is absolutely astonishing that this particular individual was allowed to, get into Britain, stay in Britain, be in a school, for example. But the problem is, a lot of people looking at this now, or listening to this now, will be thinking, well, what's going to take place to stop this happening again? Well, the latest figures, and this is more news for people, Mark, that you're going to bring to them, is the amount of people who are, quotes unquote, being kidnapped from hotels. You have some scepticism over that, don't you? These migrant hotels are talking about now.
Yeah, sources that I've been speaking to are very dubious about the particular angle that some in the press are going with, that these are children who've been kidnapped. The suspicion is actually these are pre-arranged pickups to take them away from these hotels, to go wherever, to go to friends, to family, to do pre-arranged work that they'd always intended to do in the construction industry, in cannabis farms, whatever it might be. But the suspicion is that actually most of these so-called children were not children at all, but are actually older teenagers or people in their very early 20s. And that, of course, brings up the whole different argument as how do you age verify these people as well to ensure that they are not going into a system that allows them foster care or supervisory care in a hotel and makes it far more difficult for the authorities at the end of the day to remove them from the country.
Exactly, Mark, thank you very much. Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor. Keep your emails coming in, lots to go off on this particular story. Do you think we should have mandatory age checks for anyone who wants to seek asylum here? Should we, as Lee Anderson, Tory MP, was suggesting, detain people indefinitely until we know who they are and where they're from and a bit more about them? I'm going to be hearing from a couple of you live on the show, actually. We've got some GB News viewers who are popping up and giving their thoughts on this, as well as, of course, everyone who's been emailing in. That email address there, gbviews@gbnews.uk. And later on in the show, I'll be speaking to a mother who's got children, school-age children, children who could well find themselves one day, if the situation continues, sitting in a maths class with a fully grown man who's convicted of a double murder in another country because we are not age-checking people and we are, frankly, a soft touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Moving on. Probation officers have been accused of having blood on their hands after failings left a sexual predator free to stalk and kill a trainee solicitor just days after his release from prison. Jordan McSweeney sexually assaulted and killed 35-year-old Zara Aleena in East London in June 2022. The 29-year-old attacked Zara near her home in Ilford. He was jailed for 38 years last December and had 28 separate convictions dating back 17 years. Today, the head of the probation watchdog, Justin Russell, said McSweeney should have been recalled to prison 6 days before the attack if probation staff had followed procedures correctly. The aunt of Zara Aleena, Farah Naz, says more needs to be done to avoid the same thing from happening again.
There's a lot of errors here. This wasn't just a man who happened to kill Zara because he's a monster. This monster was made. This monster was facilitated, and this monster was given a licence to walk free.
Well, earlier, the policing minister, Chris Philp, says that there are set to be changes within the probation service.
The probation service, I think, has completely accepted the recommendations the inspector has made. They're making changes to the way they risk assess offenders. They're putting more resources into it. They've hired, I think, an extra couple of thousand, 2,500 probation service staff in the last 2 years. They're increasing their funding by £155 million to make sure this doesn't happen again. They're supervising, I think, over 200,000 offenders. This kind of incident is thankfully very rare, but it is appalling and heartbreaking when it does happen.
Yes, lessons learned, lesson learned. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm sick of lessons being learned and nothing apparently really being done about it. But to shed some more light on the findings of the report, I'm joined by former Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chowdhury. Shabnam, thank you very, very much. This is damning stuff. How on earth was it allowed to happen? A catalogue of failures?
Catalogue of failures, Patrick, systemic failures. The fact is, the probation didn't join up the dots. You know, he'd had a previous restraining order against him in 2021. He wasn't requested to show where he would move to. There was no electronic tag placed on him, which basically means none of these were formed part of his report. So that allowed him to roam freely, but also those 6 days, those crucial 6 days, prevented even police and partners from locating him because it took some time to actually find where he was, by which time it was too late.
No, indeed. And Shabnam, it's a devastating question to ask, but I've got to ask you. I mean, how many other people do you fear, like this particular individual, are currently roaming the streets?
Well, look, if Jordan McSweeney, this vile individual, has escaped and been allowed to murder Zara Aleena brutally, I fear that there will be others out there that are not necessarily similar, but who are high risk, high harm offenders, who are not placed in the right grading and therefore free to roam and commit serious crimes against women, girls and other serious offences.
Indeed, and there is really shocking footage as well of near misses, it could be called, other women who this particular chap appeared to be stalking, appeared to be following, people diving into shops, getting away from him. I mean, there, but for the grace of God, this could have been one of a number of individuals. But Shabnam, you've identified there numerous things that are wrong. What's the solution? How can we stop this from happening again?
Well, I think the police minister has mentioned that there's £155 million paid for by the government. But the fact is, you've got to get backsides on seats in the first instance. You've got to have the resources, you've got to have the experience, you've got to have the capability, you've got to have people that actually understand low, medium and high risk and how to grade these. So that involves better training for probation officers. I'm not an expert on them, but I have actually worked very close with probation services because I was what you would call worked on the multi-agency public protection agencies, which is what he would have had if he'd been graded as a high-risk, high-harm offender, which would have then allowed multiple agencies to work together to actually monitor his movements. And I think there's a lack of experience, lack of resources that is allowing these kind of individuals to go out and commit some really serious, horrible offences. And I do and am concerned that there will be others out there.
When we look back at this guy's track record, dozens of offences spanning nearly 2 decades, some people will say, why was he even free anyway? Why was he even given the opportunity to have probation? I know that nobody wants to live in a totalitarian society where anyone can be locked up for anything. But maybe there are some people, Shabnam, and dare I say maybe Jordan McSweeney is one of them, who should have had the key thrown away earlier on.
Well, he had a history of violence towards ex-partners. He had 28 convictions for 69 separate offences. He was what you call a career criminal, a violent career criminal. Unfortunately, the system doesn't allow for people to be locked up permanently, and therefore they come through a process where they are either tagged.
Just on that, Shabnam, would you personally? You said, unfortunately, the system doesn't allow people to be locked up permanently. In your ideal world, would you have a system where people were allowed to be locked up permanently like that?
I think there are people that should be locked up permanently like that forever. You've seen what's happened in the last couple of years in terms of the murder of Sarah Everard. You've just looked at recently David Carrick, who has been convicted, he waits sentence. Let's see what he gets. But people like that should never, ever be allowed to roam free on our streets again.
Shabnam, thank you very much. I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Shabnam Chowdhury there, who's a former detective superintendent, just relaying shocking case. Very, very unfortunate, yes, again. Well, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, an update over Nadhim Zahawi's multi-million-pound tax case, with one senior Tory saying the former Chancellor should stand aside whilst the investigation is conducted. I'll be back in a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. The inbox in front of me right now is on fire. It's the most emails I have ever seen into any show that I've ever done on any topic. gbviews@gbnews.uk. And it's not hard to understand why, because so many of you clearly feel deeply, deeply passionate about the fact that an asylum seeker who was convicted of a double murder and drug dealing offences, he had an obsession with knives, which he posted all over the internet, posed as a 14-year-old boy, was allowed into classrooms with innocent children before murdering a man in Bournemouth. A lot of you are, well, livid about this. Jan says, what an appalling situation. Lee Anderson is absolutely correct. That is in reference, by the way, to Tory MP Lee Anderson, who says that people should be detained indefinitely if they arrive here across the channel until we can figure out who they are and where they're from. She goes on, however, I would go further by saying every single asylum seeker arriving on our shore should be detained and not allowed to claim asylum or release until they can prove, well, there you go, who they are and where they're from. Basically is what Lee Anderson was saying, but there you go. Annette says, surely the government still has enough of a majority to force through Parliament a mandatory check on all illegal entry immigrants, which includes photos, fingerprints and DNA to enable border control to check details. I, for the life of me, cannot understand the argument that people make about it's an invasion of people's human rights to do dental checks or wrist x-rays, etc., just to determine whether or not they are indeed an adult when they're claiming to be a child. I would say that the human rights of people in classrooms, the human rights of people walking down the streets, the human rights of the poor foster mum who had to look after this fully grown man with an obsession with knives for a period of time before he did inevitably stab someone to death on the streets of Britain. What about the human rights of those people? Lorraine says, I would not, repeat, not send my child to school knowing full well there is an adult illegal killer in the classroom or any overage migrant. This nonsense has to stop. And I am devastated, really, by the idea now that at schools up and down the country, undeniably there will be fully grown individuals there posing as children. And I dare say as well that parents and children probably feel stigmatised for talking out about it, don't they? Final one now. Kerr says, what is the government doing? I'm sick to death of seeing no action. How many more lives must be lost? And this is it, isn't it? How many more? Because as it currently stands, there has been nothing done about this. In fact, it could well be getting worse. Mark White, our Home and Security editor, brought us the story earlier on that people are being, quotes-unquote, kidnapped from migrant hotels. As far as he is concerned anyway, his understanding of it is he's got some scepticism about them being kidnapped and more like absconding, pre-arranged drop-offs and pick-ups, and then they are lost into the ether. It's not really safety first, is it? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Rishi Sunak, though, moving on, has ordered an ethics inquiry into former Chancellor and Conservative Party Chairman Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs, but he might be left waiting for the outcome, as Number 10 have refused to set a deadline for a conclusion to be reached. Former Immigration Minister Caroline Noakes has publicly said that Zahawi should step down as party chair, as the ongoing story has become a distraction for the Conservative Party and it could continue to cloud Sunak's image as he seeks to move away from the scandal-heavy premiership of Boris Johnson. Joining me now to get the very latest on this is GB News' political reporter Olivia Utley. So, Olivia, as it currently stands, Zahawi's not going anywhere yet.
Not going anywhere yet, and Number 10 has sort of kicked the can down the road, if you like, by launching this investigation into whether Zahawi has broken the ministerial code or not. But it is notable that Rishi Sunak has definitely shifted his position. Last week, he stood up in PMQs and defended Nadhim Zahawi's tax record. Now he's moved well away from that, and his spokesman is saying that he didn't really know the ins and outs. He knew that in the past, Nadhim Zahawi had been under investigation for his tax affairs, but didn't know what was true and what wasn't. Sort of begs the question, why did he not probe a little bit further before appointing him as party chairman? But I think this scandal, if we can call it a scandal, has moved away from Nadhim Zahawi himself and onto the Prime Minister, because when he took office, he promised to restore integrity and accountability to public life, and he's actually now overseen a whole slew of sort of mini scandals, if you like, from Gavin Williamson, Dominic Raab bullying allegations, Suella Braverman and the leaking, and now Nadhim Zahawi. His position is just looking a little bit shaky.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head, though, and you say it's now moved on to the Prime Minister. I suspect when it really lands squarely at the door of Rishi Sunak, that's when you might see a bit of action. Call me a sceptic, Olivia. We've got PMQs tomorrow. I wonder whether or not Zahawi goes not too long before PMQ, so Rishi Sunak can stand up and go, there you go, Keir, I've taken action.
Well, that could well be possible, but it's interesting that Sunak hasn't moved to get rid of him already, and one would think that if he were going to, he would have done it already. Zahawi might make the decision himself to stand down, but Rishi Sunak, it is quite difficult for him politically to get rid of Zahawi, because when Rishi Sunak formed his cabinet, he was very keen to close up some of those divisions that had opened in the Conservative Party. And he took on people from all factions of the Conservative Party, including Johnsonites. And Zahawi is a key Johnsonite.
Yeah.
So losing him while Boris Johnson is on manoeuvres could be difficult.
I think it might have been lost in all of this, actually, and possibly should have asked you this first. I mean, how bad is this, really? I know that it's allegations and there's an inquiry. The numbers are big in terms of the rumoured £5 million, the fine, etc. But we are dealing with big numbers because he's a very, very wealthy man, OK? So it's not like you or I, really, unless you've got some money stashed away I don't know about, of course. But how bad is it, what he's allegedly done here?
Well, I think that we can't gloss over the magnitude of the numbers, because I think that sort of politically anyway, that is what is very important, because to, almost everyone in the country, the idea of evading millions of pounds worth of tax is so alien that the worry is that it'll make the Conservatives look out of touch. I think what the question you're actually asking is how bad is it in terms of, technically what he's actually done? Well, he's saying that it's just carelessness. It might turn out to have just been carelessness. Technically, it might sort of turn out to be OK. It might not be a breach of the ministerial code. But the way that he has responded to the whole saga isn't a great look. He threatened journalists who were looking into it with legal action. He suggested that he had been smeared. The stories that he's come up with in the last few days to explain his behaviour, I mean, they could all be true, but it's sort of very different ways of looking at it. Overall, the way he's handled the affair is pretty bad, even if it turns out that what he's done isn't technically that bad.
All right, watch this space. Olivia, thank you very, very much. Our political reporter there. Olivia Utley, right, you're with me, Patrick Christys on GB News, and the Competition and Markets Authority is launching its first official probe into the house building industry since 2008. Find out why. Next, I've got all that coming your way and much, much more. Blinking, you'll miss it today, people. Jam-packed news agenda, but right now, here's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you. The latest top stories this hour. A relative of the murder victim, Zara Aleena, says probation officers have blood on their hands after a report found her killer was released from prison just days before carrying out the attack. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate. He attacked 35-year-old Zara in East London as she walked home after a night out last June. The findings show McSweeney should have been treated as a high risk of serious harm offender, but was wrongly graded as medium risk. Zara's aunt, Farah Naz, says more needs to be done to avoid the same thing happening again.
Our streets are not safe. Probation work has to be tight, has to be high quality, because the risks, the stake is high. The stake is lives. Zara's life was taken, and probation have blood on their hands.
The BBC chairman says he won't stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. Instead, he welcomed the Commissioner of Public Appointments inquiry into how he got his job. Mr Sharp is under scrutiny over his links to Boris Johnson and his role in facilitating an £800,000 loan for Mr Johnson while he was Prime Minister. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp says he's confident he was appointed on merit. And scientists have moved the hands of the doomsday clock closer to midnight than ever before. The metaphorical clock measures how close humanity is to extinction. It now stands at 90 seconds to midnight, which is 10 seconds closer to midnight than when last it moved in 2020. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is one of the main reasons for the change. Slightly happier news. Princess Eugenie and her husband have announced they're expecting their second child. A photograph released on Instagram by the princess shows the couple's first child, August, hugging his mother's pregnant tummy. In a statement, Buckingham Palace says the royal family is delighted and August is very much looking forward to being a big brother. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. We're back in just a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, the UK house building industry is dominated by a small number of very large firms. The so-called volume builders account for around 70% of all homes built, with smaller firms having been squeezed out over recent years. In November, Community Secretary Michael Gove wrote to the Competition and Markets Authority asking the regulator to consider investigating if this market dominance by large builders was harming potential home buyers. Now, the CMA has said that it will launch the first official probe into the house building industry since 2008. Joining me now, who else? It's our business and economics editor. It's Liam Halligan with On the Money. Homes, Liam.
Quite a niche story, Patrick, but one I've been writing about for many, many years, and I think it's important. That's why I'm bringing it to you. Let's have a look at a graph here, which really conveys to me the shortage of homes in the UK. In the 1950s, we built 2.8 million homes in that decade, 3.6 million in the 1960s, including lots of council houses, down to 2.5 in the 70s. But look at the 80s, 1.8, the 90s, 1.6, the 2000s, 1.5. From 2010 to 2020, 1.1 million homes. Fewer and fewer homes being built, even though the population has been getting bigger. There is a shortage of homes, Patrick. And this is what Michael Gove wrote to the CMA about, the Competition and Markets Authority. He said something that I believe, which is that the big volume builders are building too few homes in order to deliberately keep prices high. We want to deliver the homes communities need where they want them, said Michael Gove. And to do that, we need a market that offers a level playing field so smaller home builders get a look in, not just the big developers. And he went on to say, Michael Gove, that's why I asked the CMA to consider a study on the house building market, and I'm delighted that their board has confirmed that they will. The government will always stand up for first-time buyers and make sure any recommendations made by the CMA are put into action. What's really going on here? Somebody as senior in government as Michael Gove thinks the big volume builders building more than 2,500 homes a year that now dominate the market. A lot of the small house builders folded after the 2008 financial crisis. They lost their land. They were consolidated into the big builders. Gove thinks, the House of Lords Economic Affairs Select Committee thinks, I think, lots of analysts think that these big house builders, they will deny it, are not building enough homes deliberately to keep prices high. So homes are more expensive than they need to be because the homes are being drip-fed onto the market. Where's the evidence for that? There are over 1 million planning permissions that have been granted that haven't been built.
Oh, really?
Because they happen to be sitting often with these big firms who then don't use all of them or use them very, very, very slowly. And when you get massive demand for homes, you know, young people like you, with all respect, with your partner trying to buy a home, you know how difficult it is. Mad prices, when you've got this huge demand and supply not reacting to that demand, you get higher prices. So the accusation is that the big house builders, they will deny, make higher profits by deliberately building too few homes. That is what the CMA, I hope, is going to investigate.
Well, and realistically, what can be done about this? I mean, can you hold a metaphorical gun to the head and force them to build more homes? Use up the planning applications, I suppose.
Well, you can incentivise, I wrote about this in my book, Home Truths, you can incentivise them not to sit on planning permissions. So if you haven't used a planning permission, like actually delivered the home in 2 years, you start paying council tax if you're the house builder on that home, even if it doesn't exist, right? That's one idea. Another thing you can do is what's called antitrust. I mean, governments in the past, even in this country, have deliberately forced companies to break up if they've got too much market power and the regulator thinks there are so-called restrictive practices going on. Again, I must stress, the big house builders are often listed companies, law-abiding companies. They would deny all wrongdoing. Having said that, the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, has called the big house builders a cartel, right, which is a very loaded term. Again, they would deny that. I would stress, Your Honour, they're not here to say what they think, so I'm saying on their behalf they deny all wrongdoing. The big house builders would say they have to have lots of planning permissions because they have to build up a pipeline of supply. That's how they make their business run. And they would say, I'm sure, that this idea of a CMA inquiry into our house builders, the first since 2008, is misguided and wrong.
Well, there you go. Liam, thank you very, very much. Liam Halligan there, economics and business editor. Right, OK, so moving on from that now, Number 10 is vowed to implement robust age checks for asylum seekers following the fatal stabbing of 21-year-old Thomas Roberts at the hands of an asylum seeker posing as a child. You all know this story by now, of course, been covering it throughout the course of this show. Lawangin Abdul Rahim Zai was admitted into a local school as a student, despite previously killing 2 people in Serbia and being refused asylum in Norway. It's raised questions about how closely we actually monitor people who come into this country and whether communities are being adequately protected. Joining me now to discuss this is immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson and the head of comment at The Express, Paul Baldwin. Paul, I'll start with you. A lot of people, I think rightly, absolutely up in arms about this. How on earth was this allowed to happen? People have a right to be angry, don't they?
They absolutely do. There is, it beggars belief, it boggles the mind. It's just beyond insane that this guy, who was a double killer, who had, I mean, let's not mince words, who'd blown the heads off 2 other human beings with an AK-47, was then somehow allowed to sit with young teenage British school kids, and no one bats an eyelid. And no one knows. It boggles the mind.
It does. And Ivan, I'll throw it your way now. Ivan Sampson is an immigration lawyer. With your maybe wider legal hat on, I've got emails in front of me here from people saying, how on earth do we sue the government for allowing stuff like this to happen if your kid was sat next to him or if your kid was a victim of his violent outbursts in a classroom?
What's worrying is that it's always crisis management with this government. It's when something as horrible as this goes on that then they come up with their plans. The thing is that the assessment of age, how the government does it, they get it wrong 2/3 of the time. And for the last 12 months, they've been talking about bringing in scientific methods. Because at the moment, you have 2 social workers who follow the Merton guidelines, who then make an age assessment report. That then is looked at by the Home Office, and they either accept it or reject it. Now, it's always difficult when someone's late teens, just before their adulthood, sometimes to assess somebody's age. And I don't think it's good enough just to have 2 people looking at somebody who's trying to dupe you.
Well, it's clearly not. And by the way, I would question where these people have bought their glasses from, because the 5 o'clock shadow on this lad, I mean, if he was 14 years old, I'm Cristiano Ronaldo. Paul, I'll throw it back over to you now. We appear to be rather a soft touch, Paul.
I don't know if soft touch is the right word, but we haven't got this right at all. It's not 18 months that the possibility of scientific methods have been discussed. It's 25 years. I was doing some research yesterday, and there's pieces going back to 2005, 2004, saying these dental X-rays are going to be brought in, and time and time again, for I'm afraid human rights reasons, in inverted commas, they are rejected, and they're. And I know Robert Jenrick has been saying, we were going to accelerate and bring these in. I believe it when I see it. It was thrown out by the House of Lords last year, or 2021, I think, and it's just stayed in abeyance ever since. But to most people, I think, the idea of dental X-ray being some sort of abhorrent human rights abuse is insane. I was at the dentist just before Christmas. I had 4 dental X-rays. And I have not yet seen the need to call a human rights lawyer.
No, exactly. Exactly, Ivan, I'll lob it back your way yet again, because on that human rights angle that Paul, I think, rightly raises that, I think people are a bit sick and tired of hearing about various different people's human rights. And what about the human rights of the people who are already here? Some would say Lee Anderson, backbench Tory MP, raised an issue that no doubt will have human rights lawyers up in arms, right across the land, about essentially indefinitely detaining people until we find out who they are and where they're from. With your legal hat on again, Ivan, any chance of that happening?
I think it should happen. Look, there's no human rights objection to assessing somebody's age who we don't know how old they are. And it's moved on from dental checks. It's actually a combination of blood, skin, and DNA swabs. And it's quite accurate when they're quite young. When they get older, it gets less accurate. But no, look, I've got families. Do I want someone like this man roaming the streets, when my kids are roaming the street? I don't. And I think it's absolutely right that until we know who these people are, we should detain them. That's an absolutely fair policy for the security of British people. So I'm for it. I'm a human rights lawyer, but I will not defend people like this individual.
Yeah. Indeed. And yes, it is important, absolutely, not to tarnish everyone with the same brush. At the same time, we can't ignore stuff like this. And one of the reasons why I'm so worked up about it, and I dare say maybe you are as well, Paul, you've been in the journalism game for a very long time, is the fact that people could see this coming a mile off, couldn't they? And I don't know about you, Paul, but I can smell the whiff of a rather large scandal here. We're hearing today about people absconding or going missing from migrant hotels. All of this seems to be, Paul, something that people like you and I have been clamouring about. This will happen for a very long time, and now we're here.
Yeah, I remember doing a lot of work on this in 2016 when the dental X-rays thing came up again. It was if you remember, Pat, 2015 was the kind of when the asylum crisis started, which is now, of course, the asylum norm. And yeah, of course we can see. We've seen this coming for a long time, and the idea that the checks. Tobias Ellwood, who's the MP for Bournemouth, said yesterday, very quickly after the conviction, that the Home Office have lots of questions to answer, because how could such a dangerous individual slip through the net? But I think the question is there even a net at all? I mean, this is not a guy who just done a bit of shoplifting in Calais and slipped through. This is a man who had been convicted in a European court of a horrific double murder. And yet he just walks into Britain and there are no checks on his age, there are no checks on his background. I'm not surprised everybody is absolutely furious about this. If I'd have been a father in that school, of kids in that school, I don't know what I'd be feeling today, but it would be, it's just horrific.
It is. Look, both of you, I think both of you need to be on the case, frankly, because I suspect things will be sorted out a lot sooner and bang some heads together and get it all done. But thank you very much. That was, of course, immigration lawyer, regular here on the Channel Live in Samson, and they had a comment at the Express. Fantastic Paul Baldwin. Right, well, we're moving away from that. We're veering away from that particular story for at least a little while, because Labour Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy has laid out what a possible Labour government's relationship with the EU would be. So, quite a bit to unpack here. He said that they would aim for a closer cooperation with the bloc on trade, security and foreign policy in order to reconnect the UK with its allies. He did rather interestingly as well call it a tarnished UK, so negotiating from a position of weakness, one would imagine. But he also stated his intentions on negotiating a defence security pact with the European Union. So, what should our future relationship be with Europe? Joining me now is Dennis McShane, former Labour MP, Minister for Europe, and Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP. Now, Dennis, I will start with you because am I right in saying my researchers have told me you were there, were you? Did you hear Mr Lammy up close and personal?
Yes, talked to him afterwards, very old friend.
Right, OK, well, fair enough. And what did you make of what he had to say?
He said very, very clearly Labour's policy is no return to the single market, to the customs union, to the EU. Refighting the 2016 vote, as so many people on both sides, mainly on the Brexit side, want to do, is silly. Then he just made the point, Brexit's causing this country a lot of harm. Ask the CBI, ask British Chambers of Commerce, anybody, universities. So a Labour government would start talks. He didn't have any particular proposal. He suggested a EU-UK Defence and Security Pact, which I think will be welcome.
I can smell an EU army, Dennis.
Oh, for heaven's sake. I mean, there's been talk of that since, before I was born. Churchill called for one, actually, and we're still waiting for it to happen. The Germans won't even send their tanks to fight the Russians. So it's not going to happen. No, it was a lot of other interesting ideas in it. Some of them I think are necessarily difficult to work out, but let's see where we are in a couple of years' time.
I'll return to you. I'm going to go now down to Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP. I think people could hear you chuckling a little bit there, Ben. One of the things that got me about what David Lammy said was reconnect a tarnished UK to European Union. Is this what's wrong with British politics at the minute? Everyone seems to dislike Britain.
I think the analogy he used was being a diplomat sitting at a table and having to put up with slurs and slander, from opposite numbers in the European Union. But he's never been a diplomat, so how he can know that is, beyond me. But, I mean, the issue here, actually, is not that Labour wants to take us back into the EU. What Labour is going to do is deliver something much worse than becoming a full member of the EU. What Labour, if you unpack what it's saying, wishes to do is to take us into dynamic alignment with the EU, if not in the single market, then effectively adopting its laws and regulations, including on agri-food. I mean, he said it absolutely explicitly, on agri-foods and the like, so that Irish Sea border disappears. He's going to take us into PESCO, and absolutely an EU army is a real thing. It already has 10,000 people in a force called Frontex, which if you're a beleaguered EU member state, you'll have Frontex parked on your borders at your expense via the EU budget, looking after apparently your security. But also, we're going to be opted into the permanent structured cooperation, which is the EU's alternative to NATO. And even though Germany is a shadow of its former military self, though you have to go back to pre-World War II to find to go back to that analogy, even though Germany is a weak force, PESCO is a deeply pernicious organisation. It wishes to integrate military research, military programmes, supply lines and everything else under EU control. So it's not...
I'll come back to you, Ben. I want to get a bit from Dennis and I'll go back to you, Ben. OK, Ben. Dennis, you were kind of nodding, shaking your head and grunting rather loudly during that. What's going on?
Well, I just thought the idea of dynamic alignment, I thought Ben was going to invite me to go and be his partner on Strictly Come Dancing. That's the only dynamic alignment
It's a modern world, Dennis.
I've ever heard of.
Should I explain dynamic alignment?
Such silliness.
Should I explain dynamic alignment? I think it's important you understand what it is.
Pete, Ben,
Well, Dennis, sorry, are you saying you don't believe what Ben was saying? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, he just...
Does Dennis know what dynamic alignment is?
Do you know what dynamic alignment is, Dennis?
Sake, I've been working the EU dossier, I think, when Ben was in short trousers.
Well, what is it?
I mean, he's much younger.
What is it, Dennis? What is it, Dennis?
There's talk of strategic autonomy. What is PESCO? Why is it that not a single European government
What is dynamic alignment?
I am going to have to ask you, Dennis, what is dynamic alignment?
Dynamic alignment is what it says. It's aligning policies together, which we did to stop the genocide in Rwanda, to stop the genocide in Kosovo. We're doing it now against
That
Putin.
is not dynamic alignment.
Yes, it is.
Dynamic alignment.
All right, you tell us. You've got your version of it.
Is the United Kingdom adopting laws made in Brussels, including how those laws evolve over time? We will become a rule and law taker. Our laws will be made abroad. But we won't have any representation in those institutions.
I'll come back to you, Dennis.
We will become a vassal state under Labour's policy.
Right, Ben.
That's what Labour wants.
OK, right. So, Dennis, is that what Labour wants? You were there today. You heard David Lammy. You say that you both have heard two completely different things from the same bloke talking.
Well, look, David Lammy was talking about cooperation, which Rishi Sunak wants, which everybody sensibly wants. What he also made clear, and I don't know if Ben's got the news, the EU can't make laws for us. Patrick, whisper it loud.
That's what
EU.
dynamic. It already does. It already does for Northern Ireland. And in order to hide the Irish border, Labour's plan, and Keir Starmer said it. He said it to Rishi Sunak when he was in Belfast last week. He said, "I'll give you cover." Listen, Dennis. He said, "I'll give you cover for what you need to do." What he was saying, that was code for saying, I will be prepared to align the entire United Kingdom with EU regulations, so that Northern Ireland doesn't stand out. Because Northern Ireland is subject to dynamic alignment. And it is subjugation of the United Kingdom. Dennis, that's what you and your party wish the country to be delivered into.
OK, this is slightly pointless. It was Boris Johnson who signed up and David Frost to put the whole of Ireland under the same rules so that Northern Irish businesses can make money out of the EU. Your argument...
All right, we've got to go. We've got to go. Both of you, thank you very much. I'm being told that I have to say the words agree to disagree. Yeah, we're all friends, really. All right, that's enough. OK, right, Dennis McShane there and Ben Habib just having a massive row about the EU. I'll be back in a minute.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. It's just gone 5 o'clock, and our top story this hour: an asylum seeker convicted of a double murder and drug dealing offences, who had an obsession with knives, posed as a 14-year-old boy to enter the UK before murdering a man in Bournemouth. You couldn't make this up. He was already denied asylum in Norway. I've got serious questions, like, why can't we age check people coming across the channel? Why can't we detain them until we know who they are and where they're from? How many adults posing as kids are currently in British schools, and why are we such a soft touch? How do we stop this happening again? I'm going to endeavour to do my best to answer all of those questions very shortly. Also this hour, a damning report has found serious failings in the probation service, which left a prolific sex offender free to kill a trainee solicitor in a brutal and random attack. A catalogue of errors meant that John McSweeney was not treated as a high-risk offender, meaning he was able to attack and kill Zara Aleena. And ministers are drawing up plans to increase the retirement age to 68, apparently. Do you think people should work longer? We'll debate that before 6 o'clock. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. The main focus today is on this triple murdering asylum seeker. Should we have mandatory age checks on all people claiming asylum? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Your latest headlines right now then.
Patrick, thank you and good evening to you. Well, as you've been hearing, a relative of the murder victim, Zara Aleena, says probation officers have blood on their hands after a report found her killer was released from prison just days before carrying out her murder. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate. He attacked 35-year-old Zara in East London as she walked home after a night out last June. The findings of the report show McSweeney should have been treated as a high risk of serious harm offender, but was wrongly graded as a medium risk. Zara's aunt, Farinaz, says more needs to be done to avoid the same thing happening again.
Our streets are not safe. Probation work has to be tight, has to be high quality, because the risks, the stake is high. The stake is lives. Zara's life was taken, and probation have blood on their hands.
Well, Policing Minister Chris Philp says the government has ordered a review into how McSweeney's probation was managed.
The probation service, I think, has completely accepted the recommendations the inspector has made. They're making changes to the way they risk assess offenders. They're putting more resources into it. They've hired, I think, an extra couple of thousand, 2,500 probation service staff in the last 2 years. They're increasing their funding by £155 million to make sure this doesn't happen again. They're supervising, I think, over 200,000 offenders. This kind of incident is thankfully very rare, but it is appalling and heartbreaking when it does happen.
Well, in other news today, the chairman of the BBC says he will not stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. Richard Sharp made the comment, says he welcomed a review by the Commissioner of Public Appointments into how he got his job. Mr Sharp's under scrutiny over his links to the former Prime Minister and his role in talks over an £800,000 loan. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp says he's confident he was appointed on merit. And a senior Conservative MP has suggested the Prime Minister did not know Nadhim Zahawi had any outstanding tax issues when he was appointed chair of the party. And a warning, if you're watching on television, there are flashing images coming up.
You're going to resign, Mrs Zahawi? Do you feel under pressure to resign, sir?
Well, Rishi Sunak has ordered an ethics inquiry into Mr Zahawi's tax affairs after he admitted paying a settlement to HMRC following what he calls an error over shares in the polling company YouGov, which he co-founded. The former Chancellor has welcomed the investigation, saying he's confident he acted properly throughout. But the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling on the Tory party chairman to resign.
The idea that you could have been Chancellor when you were negotiating this is simply offensive. This is not a miscalculation. You can't miscalculate to hold money offshore and then not pay it and then have to pay a penalty. I think whatever your political persuasion, in any government, this is an individual who would have resigned or would have been sacked. Yes, let us get into the detail of what in fact happened, but Nadhim Zahawi should no longer be on the front bench. That is absolutely clear.
Almost 2,000 ambulance workers in the northwest are walking out on strike today in an ongoing dispute over pay. The government says it'll continue to engage in talks with the NHS, but the GMB union says ministers are belittling their efforts to save lives rather than discussing a pay offer. Northwest paramedic Paul Turner says they don't want to strike, but they want the government to save the NHS.
We are massively understaffed, and when we get called to jobs, we're struggling to get there. You know, we're hearing constantly on our radios that there is emergencies outstanding and no one to go to them because we're either queuing outside hospital or we just don't have the staff to respond. We've had 10 years now of austerity with no real term pay rises. We are constantly under inflation. And now I've got members right behind me and all over the UK that are returning to food banks and looking to other means to be able to pay.
Now, scientists have moved the hands of the doomsday clock closer to midnight than ever before. The metaphorical clock measures how close humanity is to extinction. It now stands at 90 seconds to midnight, which is 10 seconds closer to midnight than when it was last moved in 2020. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is one of the main reasons for the change. And Poland has formally requested Germany's approval to send up to 14 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. The Polish Defence Minister says the request comes as the security of the whole of Europe is at stake. A German government spokesman says they'll treat the request with urgency, and that comes after Boris Johnson urged other countries to follow the UK's lead in providing tanks. Writing in the Daily Mail today, the former Prime Minister called on other nations to provide Kyiv with the weapons it needs to win the war. Princess Eugenie says she and her husband, Jack Brooksbank, are so excited to be expecting their second child. A photograph released on Instagram today by the princess shows the couple's first child, August, hugging his mummy's pregnant bump. In a statement to the palace, the royal family says it's delighted that August is very much looking forward to being a big brother. That's it. More from GB News in half an hour. But now back to Patrick.
This is our top story today, ladies and gentlemen, and I have never seen the inbox fly as much as it has flown today, with so many of you expressing such strong opinions about a particular topic. Let's get stuck straight into it. A leading Tory MP has now called for all asylum seekers to be detained until full background checks have been carried out. It comes after this astonishing case of an Afghan asylum seeker who was found guilty of murdering an aspiring Marine in Bournemouth last year. Lawangin Abdulrahmzai posed as a child to enter the UK. This is despite having been convicted of a double murder in Serbia and denied asylum in Norway, and as well drug dealing offences, by the way. He was convicted for the fatal stabbing of 21-year-old Thomas Roberts in Bournemouth following an argument over an e-scooter. He was known to be carrying knives, to have an obsession with knives. He was posting videos of him fighting men for money in the streets on social media as well. And now Tory MP Lee Anderson wants tougher action to ensure violent criminals aren't able to enter the UK. Joining me now to hopefully answer some of the questions, and those questions, by the way, include the fact that this particular chap, posing as a 14-year-old, despite looking clearly much older than that, was allowed into a school. Parents of some children at that school are saying some horrific stories. I don't know how you'd feel about this, but GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White is going to answer some pretty shocking questions that we have to pose in this right now. Mark, Lee Anderson has come out, hasn't he, and said that the people should be detained. Easy to understand why, in light of this.
It's a deeply alarming story, and it really highlights what we've been raising as a very fundamental concern for some time, which is those who are coming across, those who are being told that they need to throw away their documentation, their passports, other identifying papers, their mobile phones, invent a new name, invent a backstory to make all with the sort of the end objective of being able to be granted asylum and stay here in the UK. The other side of that is not only does that perhaps make their journey to being accepted for asylum easier for them, it makes it much more difficult for the authorities here to know exactly who they are. And if you don't know who someone is, then clearly you don't know what potential risk that individual might pose, what their backstory is. And this young man, we know, had been convicted in his absence of a double murder, a very nasty double murder in Serbia, where he shot 2 people at close range with an AK-47 machine gun over a people smuggling dispute there. Convicted in his absence, also convicted of drug dealing in Norway and denied asylum in Norway. And convicted of drug dealing in Italy, but doing this under different names, coming here giving a false name, it's impossible really for the authorities to try to get an accurate handle on them. That's why Lee Anderson is now saying that we really need a proper detention policy until or unless we can actually determine who they are. This is what he told us.
Been saying from day one, anybody arriving here illegally on our shores, because we can't do the full background checks, they should be detained until we can fully decide who they are, where they've come from, and if they've got a legitimate asylum claim. If not, keep them detained in detention centres. That's not too difficult to do.
OK, get your views coming in on this, people. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Is now the time, in light of this absolutely sickening case, or time, frankly, to say, OK, if you do come over here across the channel or you're claiming asylum, you should be held in a detention centre while we figure out who you are and where you're from. But it's not just that. Once they're out and about, Mark, the fact is they're not really being monitored either, because this particular chap was brazen enough. He was on social media posting pictures with knives. He was fighting men for money.
There is no doubt this was a very nasty individual, and there should have been all kinds of alarm bells that were set off with the behaviour of this young man. I mean, his foster family, because
lucky escape, by the way, there.
Yeah, because he claimed to be a child, he was put into the foster care system. But the foster family were very worried about him because he was stealing knives from the kitchen drawer to go out, carrying that in and about the streets around Bournemouth and elsewhere in Dorset. This is him actually on the evening of March the 12th last year, when the murder of Thomas Roberts happened. This is his sort of whereabouts. He's caught on CCTV camera in and about the town centre and buses and shops at that point just before this. There's other video that shows him actually in a confrontation with a group of men, and at one point he's actually seen attacking that man as well. Now, this is that bit of video. He comes into shot with the black hoodie there, butts that man in the face who's on a phone. And that was handed out by Dorset Police as an indication of what he's up to. There's other video that he posted on TikTok showing him involved in street fights, which he was actually getting paid for as a street fighter. Very violent images of him punching and punching. You can see an individual on the ground. There again, TikTok videos released by him, some of them showing knives, bragging about, you know, his big man lifestyle here in the UK, and all of the time, of course, being treated as a child, going to school alongside school children, sitting next to these school children, of course, was actually a convicted double murderer.
Exactly, and a bit later on this hour, I'm going to be talking to somebody who is a mother, who's got children, similar-ish age anyway, to the ones that would have been in a classroom, and reports are emerging of parents, people who claim to be parents, of people who were supposedly in the school, along with this particular individual. They are claiming, this is reportedly, that this chap was involved in fights in the school and was very, very vocal, and indeed made, this is the allegation, some children, girls in that school, send him pictures, which clearly, if they're 14 years old and he is an adult, that is in itself a terrible thing. Those are the allegations there. But when it comes to the age testing, Lee Anderson's suggestion is detention, OK? And I think a lot of people will think that's a sensible move. But age verification tests, Mark, are blocked sometimes because people think it's against individuals' human rights to have their age scientifically checked. That must change.
So the way it works at the moment, Patrick, is if someone turns up on the border, claims asylum, and then says they're a child, they are more often than not, unless it's very obvious to Border Force officials looking at them, they're to take best practice from social work, social services, unless it's very obvious that this person is a 35-year-old male and not someone of 14, 15, 16, then they will err on the side of that person saying they're a child.
I believe.
And what doesn't happen are more sort of scientific medical checks to determine actually what the age of this individual is. And you're right, human rights groups, lawyers say this is an infringement of the human rights, invasive tests on children who are fleeing war zones potentially, etc.
The fact is, Mark, Britain has a problem because when you do look at the sheer numbers of people coming across every year, I think it was 46,000 last year.
Just under 46,000.
Just under 46,000 last year. And the vast majority of those, all right, absolutely fine. But it only takes a small percentage of people to be a bit like this guy, and you do have hundreds of people who are a massive, massive problem and a massive, massive threat to this country. And then on top of that, you have the fact that people, as you're about to tell us now, are going missing from asylum seeker hotels.
Yeah, there is no doubt there are hundreds of people with criminal convictions that have made it over to the UK. Law enforcement sources are quite clear on that issue. These people are coming to light when they're eventually, because criminals, by and large, reoffend. And if they get caught, they enter the system, and then it turns out there's a whole backstory to them that they eventually are able to uncover. And that is the concern. As you say, it only takes a small percentage for that figure of 46,000 to actually mean that hundreds of these people are criminals. But you don't even have to have a backstory and a record as a criminal. You're coming here, you enter an asylum system, and you're doing nothing all day except hanging about with hundreds of other asylum seekers in a hotel, bored, access to alcohol and whatever else.
Yeah.
You know, it's clearly a potential red flag to the danger that people can get into and the harm that they can then, you know, inflict on the community.
And just quite quickly on this, Mark, because I want to go to some of our viewers live on this, because at the end of the day, they're the public, the ordinary people out on the streets at the coalface of this crisis, the people, frankly, who will suffer, a little bit like that aspiring Royal Marine who was tragically stabbed to death by this individual. I am surprised by some of the reporting. Well, I'm not surprised, actually, by some of the reporting on this, where they're saying, oh, children, child workers are being kidnapped. There's kidnap squads going around to various different hotels and taking these people away. In your understanding, that's not the full truth.
No, well, certainly not sources that I've spoken to. They're very dubious about these reports in some of the media to suggest that these are children being kidnapped. What they believe is probably happening is that these are pre-arranged pickups to take people away who, by and large, may actually not be children at all and may fall into the category of Abdul Rahim Aziz and actually are individuals who are over age or adults and who want to not enter the asylum system but go off and work elsewhere in the illegal economy.
Mark, thank you very much, as ever. Mark White there, our Home and Security editor, just filling you in on a case that absolutely beggars belief, doesn't it? Absolutely beggars belief. But this show is all about you, and it's your views. And as I've said, never have I done a topic, I think, or never have I done a particular story on any show I've ever done that has garnered more interaction and more traction than this particular one, showing, I think, the level of public frustration out there. And I'm pleased to say that joining me now to give their views on this case are two GB News viewers. I've got Lee Webb and I've got Julie Ford, both from Bedfordshire. There you go, it works out that way sometimes. Lee, I will start with you. Thank you very much, both of you, by the way. But Lee, I will start with you. Your initial reaction to the fact that this chap, guilty of a double murder, drug offences, allowed into a school full of kids before he goes on and commits a murder. Your overarching view on this, Lee?
Shock and horror. Absolutely shock and horror. I think when we have asylum seekers come over to this country, there are a couple of routes that they can come over. There is a legal route where we can come, they come through refugee camps, etc., and their background is checked. However, in this case, that doesn't appear to be. Whether he had documents, and I doubt if he did. If you come into this country without documents, you should be detained indefinitely until we know who you are. And if that means turning some of our military barracks into detention centres, so be it. You know, me and my mates and our families, we lived in some of these military barracks for 2 years, 2 to 3 years at a time. The White Brigade didn't say that that was against our human rights, and they were perfectly okay for us. So they'll be perfectly okay for a few weeks for people coming over here without documents, for them to be detained until we know who they are.
Absolutely. Julie, I'll bring you in now. Same question, really. What was your initial reaction to this pretty horrific story?
Yeah, I've got to echo Lee there, to be honest with you. Just shock and horror. It should never have happened. And obviously, I understand what your previous guest, Mark White, has said about sometimes it's just really difficult to trace these people in regards to their back history. But surely, as soon as they are a criminal in another country, they've had fingerprints taken, they've had DNA taken. We've got the internet nowadays. We've got things, we can courier stuff across the country and across the world in minutes. Why aren't we able to trace these people's backgrounds? It really shouldn't be that hard. And I don't think there's going to be anything that we can do immediately to resolve the issue. I think we just need to stop what we're doing and rejig the system completely from how these people get into the country. Because as Lee has said, there are legal routes for them to come in and there are illegal routes. And the problem is the illegal routes, people are being trained and briefed on how to mess with our system, and it shouldn't get like that.
No, look, I think you're absolutely spot on. Lee, a concerning, apart from all of it, a very concerning element to me of this is how many fully grown men with criminal pasts will be sitting in schools with 14-year-old girls, boys, whatever, right now. And Lee, if nothing else is going to make people wake up and smell the coffee, surely that has to.
Well, even if it's only a handful, it's a handful too many. Like I said, if you're a genuine asylum seeker and you have generally come over here without documents, you'll be quite happy to be detained for a few weeks while it all gets sorted out and we find out who you are. You'll be only too happy, especially if you come from a war zone. And this is what we're also got to remember. Some of these guys are coming from war zones, so there could be a lot of mental health issues there. And then putting them guys into a school, you know, there's going to be things going wrong. And I think it's going to be too late.
But this is the reason why I love getting viewers on, ordinary people on, because all too often, I think anyway, your politicians or your rule makers, they're not at the coalface of this. They might not have kids. Well, they almost definitely won't have kids in the schools where these particular individuals are going to. They won't be riding an e-scooter down a street in Bournemouth while some absolute lunatic decides that he wants to take a knife to you. And Julie, do you feel as though your human rights are deemed less meaningful, frankly, than the human rights of some people coming over here?
Yeah, I do, actually, because at the end of the day, we're hearing all of this noise about the asylum seekers' human rights. It's an invasion of their human rights for us to take blood and check their age, especially if they're children. But what about my human rights as a British citizen to be safe in my own country? Surely that's not right either. So where are my defence lawyers?
Yeah, look, both of you, thank you very, very much. And I would love to speak to you again soon, hopefully under different circumstances, I might add. But thank you very, very much. It's Lee Webb there and Julie Ford, both, conveniently, from Bedfordshire. There we go. Some real GB viewers there. You can get yourself on the telly, of course. You can get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, leave your details, and you might get a phone call from one of our producers here. And you can give your views to the nation and beyond, of course, because we're everywhere these days. But you are with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. And could we all have to work until the grand old age of 68? It's been reported there's plans to raise the age you can start claiming your state pension. What do you make of that, ladies and gentlemen? They're going to try and squeeze every little penny out of you in tax, aren't they? We'll have the latest on that. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back shortly.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236 and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Right, now, I'll shift away from the things we've been talking about so far. We're going to move it on a little bit because supposed plans to raise the retirement age to 68 have been greeted sceptically by backbench MPs. Many warn that the government is playing with fire over proposals to raise the retirement age to 68 by 2035. How would you feel about this now, ladies and gentlemen? You know, you might be winding up to retirement yourself. 68 it will be, supposedly, before you might be able to get your state pension. In a move that would save the UK Treasury billions, and this is what it's about, isn't it? They can cream you out of a load of tax for as long as possible anyway, with economic difficulties and an ageing population. However, is it the right time to raise the retirement age? People are saying, well, hang on a minute, the life expectancy rate isn't increasing at the same rate as the working age. Becky O'Connor joins me now, Director of Public Affairs at PensionBee. Becky, thank you very much. Is this, forgive me, but a little bit mean on people, making them work till 68 years old? What happens to going and enjoying your retirement, putting your feet up?
It seems like that's a thing in the dim and distant past, doesn't it? I think what we really need to be looking at when we think of what is an appropriate age to retire is how long we're going to be healthy for. Health and also personal private pension savings, if we want to retire earlier than the state pension entitlement age, are so key. And the healthy life expectancy age really hasn't changed very much at all over the recent years. It's 63. So that's the age at which people can expect to live without experiencing health problems that might affect their work. And really, the state pension should be there when people are unable to work anymore because of age-related health issues. So, yes, I think the increasing the state pension to 68 and bringing forward that increase to potentially to 2035, we won't know until probably around the March budget whether the government does intend to bring it forward to that extent. But, yeah, it does seem, particularly given life expectancy is also not increasing and is actually falling in some parts of the country, to be a little unfair.
Yes, indeed. I mean, look, every single day, I'm not just saying this, I feel incredibly privileged to do what I do. I think a lot of people would view this as not particularly work. Myself, one of them, I thoroughly enjoy what I do, and I fully intend to, you know, be a fossil at the time that I retire. Someone will have to hook me off, OK? But for a lot of people, work involves things like manual labour, for example, and you can't realistically expect poor old 67-year-old Gary to be going back down the pit at that age, can you? I mean, it is bonkers. And the state pension, forgive me, I mean, it isn't even that good to begin with, is it?
Well, it really depends how many qualifying years you have. So if you work for 35 years, then you get the full state pension, and the new state pension, now that's just shy of £10,000 a year. Now it's actually going up to more than 10,000 in April. So It's actually not enough for a basic living standard in retirement, according to the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association. You do need private pension savings on top. Now, of course, what increasing the age means, if you still want to retire earlier, you're going to need more private pension savings in order to do so, because you're going to need to replace what you would have had on the state pension through your own savings. And we know through auto-enrolment, we have workplace pensions, and that's great. There's an 8% minimum contribution. The government is under pressure now to increase that too. And I would suggest if they're increasing the age to 68, they would also need to increase the amount people are able to pay in, get employer contributions and tax relief to fill that gap. And they haven't said anything about that, unfortunately.
No, absolutely not. Well, Becky, thank you very, very much, shedding a lot of much-needed light on that particular story there. Becky O'Connor, Director of Public Affairs at Pension B, just outlining, hey, how does this affect you at home? Ladies and gentlemen, you might be working or not getting your state pension until the age of 68. Is that fair? Is it not fair? You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. And coming up, I tell you what, I've got, well, a jam-packed final half hour. I better get cracking with it, really, because Downing Street has said there's no timeline or date for when the ethics investigation into Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs should be completed, buying themselves a lot of time there, but the probe ought to be carried out, quote, swiftly. Well, we'll see about that. And, yes, more on an asylum seeker convicted of a double murder who posed as a 14-year-old boy to enter the United Kingdom. I've got a security expert on that, I've got an MP on that, and I've got a mother on that, the likes of which, of course, may well have had children a similar age to the ones who had to sit next to a double-murdering adult in a school in this country. Why? Well, because our asylum process is such a soft touch. But right now, it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. In the headlines this hour, well, the top story, a relative of the murder victim, Zara Aleena, says probation officers have blood on their hands after a report found her killer was released from prison just days before carrying out the murder. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate. He attacked 35-year-old Zara in East London as she walked home after a night out last June. The findings show McSweeney should have been treated as a high risk of serious harm offender, but was wrongly graded as medium risk. Zara's aunt, Farah Naz, says more needs to be done to avoid the same thing happening again.
Our streets are not safe. Probation work has to be tight, has to be high quality, because the risks, the stake is high. The stake is lives. Zara's life was taken, and probation have blood on their hands.
Well, in other news today, the BBC chairman says he won't stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. Instead, he welcomed the Commissioner of Public Appointments inquiry into how he got his job. Mr Sharp's under scrutiny over his links to Boris Johnson and the role he made in facilitating an £800,000 loan for Mr Johnson while he was Prime Minister. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp says he's confident he was appointed on merit. And the firefighter who was seriously hurt in a blaze at the Jenner's department store in Edinburgh yesterday has been named. 38-year-old Barry Martin joined dozens of other crew members to tackle the flames on Rose Street. He's still in hospital and he's in a critical condition. The Scottish Fire and Rescue team say they're still trying to figure out what caused the fire. Princess Eugenie and her husband have announced they're expecting their second child. A photograph released on Instagram by the princess today shows the couple's first child, August, hugging his mother's pregnant tummy. In a statement, Buckingham Palace says the royal family is delighted and August is also very much looking forward to being a big brother. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. We're back in just a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, ladies and gents, I've got loads to crack through in the next 25 minutes or so, so make sure you don't move. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the asylum seeker who posed as a 14-year-old boy, was allowed into classrooms with innocent children before murdering a man in Bournemouth. Sue says, this is not surprising. It was just a matter of time before someone was killed. I just feel for the family of the murdered young man. Yeah, absolutely 100%. I also feel deeply, deeply sorry for the parents of any child who had to sit in the same classroom as this chap. Shocking reports coming out from parents who claim to be, well, parents of the kids in this class as well, saying that girls, and they will be girls because they'll be underage, they'll be around 14 years old, supposedly being threatened and sending pictures to this particular man. It's shocking stuff. Alison says, an asylum seeker claiming to be a child was placed in a secondary school in my hometown a while ago, and only when pupils raised concerns with parents, he disappeared. It was blatantly obvious he was a fully grown man. Yeah, exactly. Why is there a man with a beard in your 14-year-old son or daughter's maths class? It's shocking stuff. Where are the human rights of those kids? Why are we not being able to age test these people as a point of kind of necessity, really, as soon as they get here? Sticking with that story, Number 10 has vowed to implement robust age checks for asylum seekers following the fatal stabbing of that 21-year-old Thomas Roberts, an aspiring Royal Marine, by the way, the hands of this particular asylum seeker, Lawangeen Abdul Rahimzai, who did basically commit a double murder in a different country, had prosecutions for drug dealing, etc., rejected by Norway, but of course, classic, was allowed to come and enter foster care and a school here, despite, of course, all of those previous convictions. Joining me now is Conservative MP and Commons Defence Committee Chair, Tobias Ellwood. Thank you very much, Tobias. He's calling for a Home Office probe into the case. Yeah, absolutely. People, though, Tobias, I think, are sick and tired of lessons learned because we've been shouting about this for a very long time. This was a matter of time and serious concerns. It's only a matter of time before it happens again.
Yes, and that's the big challenge that we now face. I mean, I think it's always important to start with the person, the victim. And I'm pleased you mentioned that Tom Roberts was aspiring to be a Royal Marine, wanting to serve his country. In fact, it's in that spirit that he stepped forward to try and calm down an argument between his friend James Medway and Abdul Rahimzai. You know, I've got huge affinity for anybody that steps in, you know, that tries to calm situations down. I'm an interventionist myself, but things clearly spiraled terribly out of control. And we're now left learning so much more about this individual, wondering why so many red flags came up, but were missed. And I think you've listed them very well indeed. This individual's been in 2 other European countries where he's got criminal records. He was denied by Norway as well. And then he also threatened in this country, he threatened his foster carer. And that, again, should have been a red flag. But the big one is, and you touched on at the very beginning, how can we confirm the age of any individual, whether they're going to be an asylum seeker or not? There are cleverer ways of doing that, with x-rays, looking at teeth and things like that, if somebody's clearly lying about their age. And it's for an investigation now to determine what went wrong. I raised this in Parliament today. We had a debate on this matter, and I was glad to get the assurances from Minister Robert Jenrick that this is exactly what he is now going to do, to go away. Because as you rightly highlight, could this happen again?
Well, indeed, and we are hearing increasing reports of people absconding or being taken, depending on which angle you particularly want to take on that, from asylum seeker hotels. Concerns, naturally, for people about where they end up and what their intentions are. Tobias, one of your colleagues, anyway, Lee Anderson, did say that he was in support of people being detained. If you come over here across the channel, for example, detain them until we can find out who they are and where they're from. Would you support that?
Well, there needs to be a robust process. I think this is one of the big commitments that the Prime Minister has made to get this right. I mean, just to put this into context, and there's no way justifying it, it's flagging up perhaps the backdrop to which we're dealing with this. We decided, wrongly in my view, to turn our backs on Afghanistan. We then, I think correctly, opened our doors to genuine asylum seekers who might be pursued by the Taliban. And in this individual's case, it's understood that he lost his parents and then was beaten up by the Taliban as well. And you can understand, I think, that individuals, particularly youngsters who are exposed to the horrors of war, becoming desensitized in understanding the differences between right and wrong. And if they're not addressed, then they could become a danger to society, which is clearly what's happened here. And what's falling apart is the fact that there isn't this robust process. Now, detention centres or whatever, I'm more concerned as what happens to when individuals come forward, how are they scrutinised and checked to make sure their age is verified. But most importantly, if they're coming here with a criminal record, that we should know about it. Now, without opening up the Brexit debate, when we departed the EU, we lost sight of some of those key criminal databases. So I'm supportive of where we are today, but I do believe we need to have access to those databases. It would have been helpful to know what the Italians, what the Serbians, what the Norwegians were thinking, what was on their databases. That could have helped things here in the UK.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, though, this just seems like a completely mutually beneficial thing to have done anyway, regardless of being in or out of European Union. I have never quite managed to get my head around why public safety and the safety of individuals like that particular 21-year-old aspiring Royal Marine should be jeopardised as a result of people wanting to take back control of their own laws, borders and money. Surely there should be joint databases still that can protect people, because it can work both ways very easily, and I'm pretty sure the Italians or whoever would want us to share information and be able to share information with them if this particular chap was going the other way. It is astonishing, though, for me that these people are in schools and that children are potentially exposed to this kind of stuff. Some rather nasty stories coming out anyway, allegedly, from parents who are saying that their daughters were threatened into sending pictures to this particular chap. Is there any way of us knowing how many of these people are currently, how many adults, basically, are currently in schools with children at the moment?
We don't know. I think there's some of the lessons to be learned, which is exactly why I flagged this up today. If I may just go back to your point, I think there is a quid pro quo there with the European Union, with the continent. Bear in mind that we have MI5, MI6, we have some of the best agencies in the world with some of the best police force capabilities as well. So there's a mutual benefit, as you rightly point out, to make sure that our world is safe, particularly when there's such huge movements of migrants from not just across Europe, but wider afield as well. But you ask another pertinent question, which I hope the Home Office will register and recognise, is how many others are in this similar situation, are pretending to be of a different age and getting away with it.
Yeah, well, this is it. And Tobias, with the, all kinds of, I knew that you didn't know the answers to that because no one does, and that's the point, right? We need to try to find out. Look, I'm sorry about this. Kind of. I just want to ask you one quick question about Nadhim Zahawi. Your views on where he's at the minute. Should he step aside at the moment, do you think, or should we just let this investigation run its course?
Well, I think now that we've got this investigation going, then I think to do anything otherwise would be difficult. It would mean Labour would have sort of won from that perspective. It should have gone, I think, to an ethics advisor. The Prime Minister should have slid it across the table. clearly it was gaining headlines. The fact that you're now asking me this today, on top of all the other issues we could be discussing, it starts to distract. So, yes, Nadhim Zahawi, I'll say, is a very close friend of mine. He came across this country with nothing, with his parents. He's built up a formidable business. His tax issues, as did anybody's, are their personal matter. If errors were made, it needs and should be investigated and declared. That is now for the ethics advisor to do so, and that's best place for them to continue. You and I don't know the details of that, so let's wait to see what the outcome is.
Tobias, thank you very much. As ever, Tobias Elwood, of course, who is Conservative MP and Commons Defence Committee Chair. Right, well, look, we're sticking with this story, but we're getting a different angle on it now. We've mentioned the fact that these individuals, we do not know, and you heard it there straight away, straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, we currently in this country have absolutely no idea how many men posing as children are in schools with children, OK? And that is a devastating state of affairs. And apparently it would be quite easy to do, because the vast majority of people who come over here who claim to be children are just essentially believed, because the Human Rights Brigade get involved, don't they, and say, well, it will be against their human rights to go and do any kind of real, proper forensic age checks. Meanwhile, children, and in the case of this particular individual that we saw earlier on, parents of children who were in his class, bear in mind he was already a double murderer by the time he was in this class, are coming out and saying that they believe that some of their daughters were forced into, or certainly coerced into, sending pictures to him. And that is shocking, isn't it? Well, I'm joined now by Deputy Leader of UKIP, Rebecca Jane. And Rebecca, thank you very much for joining me. Now, you're a mother, and does a case like this worry you, considering that this man was allowed to be in a classroom alongside young children? I don't want to personalise it too much, but, I mean, it could be your kids, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, Patrick. It could be any one of our children. I do have a 16-year-old and I do have a 10-year-old. We have to look at the basic facts here. So obviously you're questioning how many adults are actually posing as children and sat in our classrooms. Well, what I can tell you is that in 2020, there were 54% of lone child asylum claims that actually turned out to be adults. Now, today, in 2022, over 70% of lone child asylum claims are actually adults. And that's because we don't have the checks like other countries. We've got France, Greece, Norway. They've all got X-rays, facial recognition. What we have, and the checks that we do when they come here, is that we sit them down with a social worker, give them a lovely cup of tea and ask them how old they are. Even if that social worker thinks that they are 24 years old, they give them a clear entry into the system, faster processing, faster housing, more money, and they have to believe them. Even if they think that they're 24 years old, they still then put them into classrooms with our children.
It is astonishing, though, isn't it? And, Rebecca, I dare say there are people out there right now, whether it's children or the parents of those children, who are saying, there is a fully grown man in my 14-year-old maths class, and they're probably told by the Woke Brigade, oh, no, you can't possibly say that. This person's fleeing war and persecution, Rebecca.
Well, Patrick, I'm the Deputy Leader of UKIP. I'm absolutely not going to have that stance. I have a duty to protect my children. I have a duty to protect the children of this country. You can talk about their human rights all you want, but unfortunately, the UK is a sinking boat. We have to do something to start protecting ourselves. And right now, we don't have the facilities, the resources and the capacity to start looking after people from other countries. We need a block on all asylum claims for at least the next 5 years. The government, this is not a new problem. Let's start with that factor, because in 2017, one of the London tube bombers was actually a lone child asylum claim, and who actually turned out to be an adult. We've had this problem since 2017. What on earth have the government been doing in all this time?
Yeah, look, Rebecca, thank you very, very much. And, it's interesting to have you on the show and get your take on things and at least floating some solutions, whether people agree with them or disagree with them, because I think for a very long period of time there's just been a lot of hot air, hasn't there? That's the Deputy Leader of UKIP there. Rebecca Jane, thank you very, very much. Right, well, we're moving away from that story. Now, the reason I wanted to do a lot on it is because, by the way, I think it's very serious, and thousands of you, literally thousands of you, have been getting in touch on that over the course of this show. But we will move away. Rishi Sunak remains under pressure over his knowledge, or possible lack of it, about Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs. So the Prime Minister has ordered an ethics inquiry after the former Chancellor hit the headlines this week after it emerged that he paid a fine to settle a tax dispute with HMRC. Labour are firmly calling for his resignation from the front bench, but so far Sunak has stood by the Conservative Party chairman. Let's discuss this now with GB News' political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, Zahawi's not moving at the minute.
No, he's not moving for now. But there is definitely a shift in the language coming out of Number 10. Last week, of course, we saw Rishi Sunak stand up and publicly defend Nadhim Zahawi. And now the defence coming out of Number 10 is that Rishi Sunak wasn't quite sure what the situation was with his tax affairs. So he did know that there had been previous allegations and that they'd been looked into, but he was told by the Cabinet Office that they'd been resolved and that he was OK to hire him. Obviously, this begs the question, why did he not probe a little bit further? And I think, you know, the story has now sort of moved away a bit from Nadhim Zahawi, who has become a bit of a distraction, and onto Rishi Sunak, because it does feel a bit like he's got previous here. He came into office promising integrity and accountability, and he's had these sort of slew of mini scandals and hasn't acted decisively in any case.
Is it a bit... Yeah. Is it a bit unfair on Rishi Sunak, this, though, in the sense of Nadhim Zahawi's personal tax affairs? Rishi Sunak wouldn't necessarily have been aware of all of that. He may well have been, we don't know. We'll have to wait and see. There seems to be the kind of exhaust fumes of the previous regime and the one before that, and he inherited quite a lot of chaos. And now this is being landed at him. He did say he wanted honesty and integrity, etc. Do you think he should have acted more decisively and quicker? Is that the Labour angle to this?
Well, I think that there are Conservative backbenchers who certainly feel that, it might come to light that Nadhim Zahawi didn't break the ministerial code and that what he did was just about, you know, within the realms of acceptability. But politically, it really isn't a good look. And it's thought that perhaps a more experienced Prime Minister, remember, Rishi Sunak wasn't even elected very long ago. No. He hasn't been on the front bench very long at all. Someone with a bit more kind of political intuition and nous might have thought, well, it doesn't really matter what the technicalities of this are. Rishi Sunak is very interested in technicalities. It doesn't really matter. It's about the politics. It's about the fact that, you know, this man has, for whatever reason, evaded millions in tax, a concept which is just alien to such a...
Well, it is, absolutely. It is.
And makes the Conservatives look out of touch. That is what I'm hearing from some backbenchers, but Nadhim Zahawi still has his friends.
The fact is that there will be millions of people right now at this exact moment in time looking at the self-assessment tax forms or getting in touch with the taxman, etc. And the numbers in question here from Nadhim Zahawi will be way out of touch for the vast majority of people. At the same time, you don't want to persecute an individual for doing fabulously well for themselves, and when you are dealing with such large numbers as Nadhim Zahawi sees every single time he opens his bank account, then yes, all right, 5 million quid is still a lot of money. PMQs is tomorrow. You and I will no doubt be discussing all of this tomorrow. What do you expect Starmer to go off? Will it be this?
Well, Labour's been a bit slow to react on it so far. They haven't yet dug in the knife, but I am assuming that is what Keir Starmer is going to major on in PMQs tomorrow. But we have seen before Keir Starmer take a sort of left-field approach and go on something which Rishi Sunak isn't expecting. But it would seem that he would be mad to avoid this.
Yes.
What is quite clearly an open goal.
An open goal, yes. Hopefully he doesn't smash it over the bar, or maybe, depending on your political leanings, hopefully he does. Olivia, thank you very, very much. Olivia Utley there. GB News' very own political reporter. Right, it's that time already. This show has flown by, not least because of you wonderful people, by the way, and thank you so much for everyone who's been getting in touch. But it's Jubes & Co, and she's here.
Hello.
What's coming up on your show, Jubes?
I'll be carrying on a conversation that I heard you crack on with earlier about the 200 missing so-called children that have been asylum seeking. Where have they gone? Who are they? How concerned should we be? And whose fault is all of this? And how on earth do we fix all of this mess? Also, 70% of hospital trusts apparently have some form of restrictions in place still about this is the whole COVID thing. I think that's ludicrous, but other people might say it's just basic common sense. So fascinating to get people's thoughts on that. Also, schools, who should get the final say in what kids are taught, particularly when it comes to things like, like the whole gender and relationships and sex education? Should it be the parents or should it be the teachers? What else have I got for you? Oh, yeah, menopause. How could I possibly forget that? It's been ruled out now, menopause leave, Patrick. You won't be affected by this, but it's one of the reasons...
I think in one way or another, every man is affected by the menopause, but we'll leave that there.
Well, actually, I was was going to say, in this day and age, I say that you're not affected because you're a guy, but goodness me, you can get cancelled for those kind of common sense thoughts, can't you? Yeah. Anyway, is it discriminatory against men if women go on menopause leave?
Say that again, Ju. Sorry. So men. Sorry, that was.
So if a woman, and you've got to forgive me, Patrick, right? I am talking in old-fashioned terms here. You know, a woman going on a menopause.
I'll let you off.
If they had menopausal leave granted to them, apparently that could be discriminatory towards men. Could it?
Good grief. Oh, well, I don't think so, but, I mean, I'm apparently way out of touch when it comes to all of this stuff now. But, hey, I'll tell you what, it's an absolutely cracking show you've got lined up there. You had me gripped. I want you to crack on with it now.
We'll educate you, Patrick.
Educate me. Please do. Yes, all right. Well, Michelle Dewberry coming your way very, very shortly. And it's one not to miss by the sounds of that. Hitting all the top topics. That's going to be a great chat, isn't it? Look, thank you very much, everybody. You've been with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. I will be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. But before I go, I want to know if you want to be on my show, OK? So give your opinion on any topic that we discuss. And if you do decide that you want to get involved, you can get involved. Like some of our previous viewers, they got themselves on the telly. Tweet me or at GB News and put the message, put me on the telly, OK? That's pretty straightforward stuff, people. Put me on the telly needs to be the title of your message. At GB News is the Twitter handle, or of course you can email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk. That again, pretty straightforward. If you can't remember this, then you probably shouldn't be on the telly. It says, put me on the telly, right? Anyway, that's in the subject line. One of my producers will be in touch with you, and it will be great to see you. OK, up next is Michelle Dewberry with Jubes and Co. Oh, see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Take it easy.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. Still the risk of some fog and freezing fog patches, particularly across southern parts of England. Through the next 24 hours we will see rain pushing south, and we can see that nicely on the pressure chart. A cold front pushes southwards across the UK, but high pressure always nearby, meaning those weather fronts will be on the weak side. Generally staying dry for many as we end the week, but weather fronts always nearby towards the north. Through this evening time, frost and fog reforming across central and southern parts of England. Elsewhere, generally quite cloudy, particularly as we head into the early hours, some rain and drizzle pushing in across the north and the west. Here, mild, temperatures holding up -5 or -6, again across central southern England as we head towards Wednesday morning. Cloudy, foggy start across the south, the fog patches dense in places. Band of rain pushing south across northern parts of the UK. This light and patchy generally. Behind it, though, turning brighter into the afternoon across Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will be some showers across